This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Paul, how are we supposed to open the show with Joe over there, Morning Joe, showing Juan Soto in a Mets uniform?
No, this is not good. But hey, Stevie Cohen, he won the day. He wrote the biggest check, and so Juan Soto, New York Mets. And they bring him. They're all set to go there.
Across the nation, from Washington 99-1 to San Diego and the Padres, back to the dreaded New York Yankees. It's un-American.
No, it's crazy. What's going on there in
capitalism at its best. Speaking of capitalism, we got a great show for you this morning. Michael Purvis with us a bit, but first we're going to go to Stephen Carroll in Paris with a new prime minister. It's not Churchill, but we'll get some perspective from Mr. Macron as well. Dan Ives and Gene Munster together. Wow. The interview for Global Wall Street today, the two of them on the future of Mag 7. Bloomberg Surveillance across the nation. Brought to you by American Arbitration Association. Business disputes, they are inevitable. Resolve faster with the American Arbitration Association, the global leader in alternative dispute resolution for over 90 years. More at adr.org. Let me spell that out again, adr.org. From the Interactive Broker Studios, this Friday, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We got tech stocks leading the charge with shares of Broadcom up 14% and predicted a boom in demand for its AI chips. We'll start with NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 139 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 85 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 19 points. The two-year yield, 4.20%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.34%, and that's up 1 basis point. Europe's stock 600 right now down about 0.1%, and that's after President Emmanuel Macron names Francois Bayrou to be France's new prime minister. Head over to currencies. We go to the euro right now, up about 0.2%. It strengthened after the ECB sounded a little bit less dovish on rates than expected. Then we have the dollar steady. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is steady. It's on track for its second straight week of gains against a number of currencies. The Japanese yen weaker. The pound is weaker. To earnings we go. Costco posted a quarterly profit, beat expectations. That was thanks to healthy consumer spending at the Mateo household. The stock is up actually 50% year to date through Thursday's close. Its shares have been back and forth all morning. Right now it's up about 0.1%. And finally, shares of furniture company ARH, it's formerly Restoration Hardware, up 17%, swung to a quarterly profit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Taya. Thanks so much. We're going to get to Michael Purvis here, but right now in London, help me here, Richard. London, I think. London. Stephen Carroll with us with Bloomberg Daybreak in London, their phenomenal podcast in the early American morning. Stephen Carroll, this is different. Michel Barnier refined. Everybody sort of knows who he is in France. And out of nowhere, Francois Bayrou comes out of the Pyrenees near Lourdes. He's a different kind of prime minister, isn't he?
He's different, and yet he has many of the similar characteristics to Michel Barnier. He's someone who's been around the French political scene for a long time. He's of a similar age to Michel Barnier. He's someone who actually ran for president several times himself, and he was, in some ways, the Emmanuel Macron before Emmanuel Macron. You could argue that Francois Bayrou walked, so Emmanuel Macron could run. Right. He came third in the presidential election in 2007 and had nearly 20% of the vote.
I mean, Paul Sweeney's reading Match on the weekends with a beverage of his choice in his hands. I'm not. Explain to our audience, Stephen Carroll, the far left hates Macron, the far right hates Macron, so he picked a prime minister from his own clan, right? Why?
Pretty much. So not from his own party, but from the centrist movement. And there's a couple of arguments that could be made here. Emmanuel Macron has spent the past week appealing to the parties of the centre-left, particularly the Socialist Party, to try and get them on board to change the calculations in the National Assembly about who might actually support this budget to succeed where Michel Barnier had failed. it would appear that he didn't manage to find a candidate from those ranks that he wanted to run the government, or that he couldn't get the socialists on board. So he looks now to have chosen from someone who he knows and he trusts, who is from a politics that he understands, and perhaps then is able to bring together from the centre, whereas perhaps Michel Barnier was being seen as too close to the centre-right. Interesting, the first reaction we've had from Jordan Bardella, who is the president of the far-right National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party. He said they won't vote no confidence in the government of François Bayrou for the moment. So there's perhaps somewhat of a side endorsement there from the National Rally.
Stephen Carroll, too short a visit. We got to have him on next week. He's got to tell me his favorite restaurant in Paris. We'll do that next week. We'll do that. Stephen Carroll, Bloomberg Radio, London. With his ratings compared to ours, he's like ginormous.
He's a player. Yep.
Speaking of player, we start strong on this Friday. We got a really eclectic lineup, and we look to the equity markets. Why don't you bring in the gentleman from New Hampshire?
Exactly right, Mr. Michael
What
Purvis.
a summer, the whole summer up in New Hampshire.
Summer, but they got the flies and the whole thing. I'm not up for that whole thing. Michael Purvis, CEO and founder of Talabac, he joins us here, Capital Advisors. Michael, all right, here we are. We're closing out 2024. S&P 500 up, I don't know, 25, 26, 27%. Now what do we do in 27? I mean, in 2025, what do we do here?
Well, I think the first thing you need to think about from a more of a broader strategic perspective is that you have the Fed easing to some level. We're not sure how much, but they are easing into unemployment rate that is in the low fours, right?
Yep.
To a very strong economy. There's some, looks like there's some potentially earnings friendly things on the horizon with lower regulatory burden, lower tax rates, corporate tax rates, and so forth, right? So that's a very unique condition. So that's very risk on. Now, I think in the more tactical near term, you're looking at valuations that are really stretched here. I'm very bullish for a sprint into the year end. I'm also concerned that there's going to be some sort of late winter hangover in January, February. Simply just nothing bad, but I think a little bit of sort of sell some of the news upon inauguration, and the valuations across all the indices, some more than others, are just really stretched right now, right? So companies are going to do, I think, fine earnings-wise next year. Are they going to do enough after 2 amazing years in the stock market to just come roaring back with another 30% year? I don't think so.
We were trained, Michael, 10%'s a correction, 18%'s a bear market, maybe 20%'s a bear market, depends where you went to school. Okay, fine. What's the new correction for Michael Purvis? Is it down 5%?
It feels like it's down 2%, right? It feels sometimes right after this year, which has been kind of a straight line.
Explain to the youngsters like Lisa Mateo, we do go down.
Yeah, no, and I think we've almost forgotten that, right? Because we've had such a strange economy, strange market, coming into COVID, out of COVID, massive stimulus, huge rate hike, and all these conflicting forces, and yet we've sort of there's been a lot of people in 2022 coming into 23 were still super bared up, and those ocean line, those giant allocators, I think were needed to buy every dip they could this year, and I think that was part of why you didn't see that classic 8-10%.
To get ready for Gene Munster and Dan Ives coming up, folks, our entire half hour on tech. From where you sit, Michael Barr, is Apple underowned? Is Tesla underowned? Is Mag 7 underowned?
They're not. No, I don't think they're underowned in any significant way. That said, if you look at a lot of different valuation metrics relative to their growth rates, they're a little bit more easier to own right now than I think the Russell 2000, for example, which has been everyone's favorite rotation trade, but it's simply doesn't have the fundamental underpinnings there. And I think the other thing that you have to think about as you're talking about 2025 is that there simply is sort of a higher political risk premium, if you will, that's going to bleed into some of the economic forces that underscore those earnings in some of the more smaller domestic companies. And what I mean by that is that simply we don't know exactly what's going to get done on tariffs and so forth, on a lot of these policies. And whatever does look like it's going to get done may be undone, a few months later. You just don't know. So I think that begs for a question about whether there is sort of a political risk premium, if you will, on some of those more domestic shares there. I think if you ask me, I think the other half of that question is what's going to sort of blaze the path forwards next year. I'm going to be boring, Tom, and say it's going to be those magnificent 6 or 7 stocks there that are going to keep doing.
Tom's long those. He's been clipping coupons the whole time. Talk to us about just we're thinking about the Federal Reserve here because that's still very much in play. We don't know what they're going to do. Next week we'll hear from the Fed here. The volatility of GDP. Talk to us about that.
So this is a theme that I think is a very interesting concept there, which is that Tom asked, well, we haven't had an 8% pullback or 10% good old-fashioned pullback. Well, if you look at the last 50, 60 years of GDP growth, the last 2 recessions we had were giant shocks, right? It was COVID, and then before that, the Great Financial Crisis. Now, admittedly, the Great Financial Crisis was self-created by us here in the U.S. economy, right? But we haven't had a traditional recession, if you will, the classic business cycle, right? And so one of the metrics that I think is very interesting to consider is that if you strip out exogenous shocks to the economy, like those 2 I just mentioned, the volatility of GDP has been collapsing since the 1950s and 60s. In other words, the business cycle is just simply different. So here's a question, Paul. Let's say COVID never happened, and we had that 2016, 17, 18, 19 growth. It's the counterfactual. But where would the economy be? Would we have gone into a recession? Maybe there's sort of a condition now that is just where the business cycle is kind of hyperextended. If you look at the maximum prints in the economy, again stripping out those tail conditions, those are lower. The floors are higher there, and it's something we haven't really tasted a traditional cyclical recession in some time, and I think there's reasons for that, right?
I'm out of time.
Yeah.
I got 20 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Is the dollar resilient through the year?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be. I think it's going to be supported there. I think there's certain people in D.C. that won't want it as strong as it is, but I think it's going to be. It's not going to be weak there unless look, the burden's on a lot of these other countries to really make that condition happen.
I got to congratulate you because there we were. It's like you taking. You didn't see this because you took off every Friday.
Every Friday
this
in the summer. Yep.
We're talking to Purvis in June when the black flies are still there. We're talking to him when the deer flies show up first week of August.
Get 15 minutes of summer there.
He's saying participate in the market. It's true. There's snow still under the trees. How far are you from Squam Lake?
Not far, actually.
You're near Golden Pond?
Yeah, just north of that. Yeah, I mean, it's a short, by New Hampshire standards, car drive away.
Did Jane Fonda ever visit?
It's a funny story about that, but
there's a funny story. We'll save that for the break. Okay. Michael Purvis, Talbach, and I get it. Our guests are never going to come back. Paul.
I know. They know better.
That's all there is to it. Paul, what are you looking at? I'm looking at 10-year real yield out to 2.01%.
Yeah.
Higher yield.
Yeah, exactly. I got the futures here on the equity markets just slightly higher. Tom, the S&P up about 20 points. The NASDAQ up 150 points. That's 0.7%. Not too bad for a Friday.
Yeah,
we'll take that.
See. Lisa's taking notes. She's looking up Jane Fonda on the Wikipedia. Yep. Henry Fonda was her father.
That's right.
Lisa.
Jazzercise.
Fonda, just so this is a movie a few years ago about where Michael Purvis lives in the summer. Life is tough. Futures up 21, Dow futures up 74. The VIX well under 14, 13.41. Dan Ives, Gene Munster in the 8 o'clock hour. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit IBKR.com/forecast and get started today. Well, we've got futures pointing to a strong end of the week on Wall Street. Traders looking ahead to the final Federal Reserve interest rate decision of the year. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, 158 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 65 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 20 points. The two-year yield 4.21%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, Brent crude up nearly 1% at $74 a barrel. WTI crude $70 a barrel. We have spot gold down about 0.5% at $2,668 an ounce. Few companies making news. Elon Musk, well, he renewed his feud with the SEC, revealing that the agency investigating his company Neuralink and may have take action over his investments in Twitter. Now, he's also looking to turn SpaceX's Starbase site in Texas into a new city. He wants to move the company's headquarters there, and we'll just stick with Musk for this last story, since why not? Reuters reporting the Trump transition team, it wants the incoming administration to drop a car crash reporting requirement that's being opposed by Tesla. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Because everybody's coming. Be honest, Paul. It's 3:55 p.m. You get up from the surveillance nap, and you're just looking at you're looking at what are stocks doing?
Closing.
What's Apple doing? Closing Dow, and it's a bull market, folks. What am I doing? I'm watching the litmus paper of the system with Ebrahim Rahbari, and that is the foreign exchange market. There's so much signal there that pros are looking at. So we're going to get away from Dan Ives and Gene Munster in the next hour. And right now with us from Fordham Global Insight, Ebrahim Rahbari, a conic with Willem Bouter at Citigroup a number of years ago. Ebrahim, thank you so much for joining. Is Mr. Trump's worst post-inauguration nightmare a new, stronger dollar with DXY breaking ever higher?
It's great to be with you once more. And well, my take would be more that a strong dollar, more than anything else, reflects the strength and maybe even the exceptionalism of the U.S. economy, and actually has the side effect of maybe helping him over the inflation concerns. So if you look back at the election, nobody really voted against the strong dollar. People voted against high inflation. So as much as President-elect Trump likes to occasionally mention the dollar, I don't really think it's central in his sights.
Okay, so it's not central. Then what is within the foreign exchange and the geopolitical space? Is it what we see in France this morning? Is it Germany flat on their back? What's the top item for Ebrahim Rahbari into 2025?
Well, in fact, you put the nail on the head there. I do think for the foreign exchange market at large, Trump is still number one. And he's been obviously very highly publicized in the preponderance of the U.S. driving foreign exchange. But even in Trump's first term, and in 2022, when the dollar did outperform, it did so against the backdrop of weaker rest of the world growth. And the way that I look at the foreign exchange market right now is, I think the market is right in seeing that exceptionalism go a little bit further. I'm sitting here in Germany today. We're looking at an election at the end of February. And I think it's almost certainly going to get worse before it can get better. And that means we will see yet further declines in the euro dollar and more broadly, a further weakening in the euro against the other major currencies.
Is parity in play here for the euro? I'm asking for a friend of mine who's making reservations to Paris as we speak.
Yes, I think for investors, it's always very uncomfortable to be chasing a pre-existing and pretty long-running trend, and every evaluation model will tell you the euro is pretty cheap. But in fact, parity would be my expectation to hit in the first half of 2025, maybe in the first quarter.
Oh, come on! So Ebrahim, can't we get euro parity? I'm thinking by December 26th at 3 p.m.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Thank you.
Actually, historically, the euro actually strengthened into the end of the year in December. And that there's a basic logic to it, which is into the end of the year and at the very beginning of the year, people like to buy cheap things.
Right.
And so the cheaper currencies, and then there's a corporate element. So I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on further weakness between now and the end of the year. But I think there is still more weakness for Europe.
Ebrahim, what do you expect? We've seen the ECB cut rates yesterday. Pretty much central banks across the globe, maybe with the exception of the Bank of Japan, are cutting rates. What do you expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to do next week?
So I think the Fed is actually in a very unusual spot compared to a lot of the other central banks. Because if you look at the Eurozone, Canada, Sweden, in particular, their economies are really weakening fast. Whereas for the Fed, if you took a survey, and maybe accepting your brilliant Pollyanna Wong, but most analysts at this point expect the Fed to cut next week, but don't really think that they should be cutting. So what that implies at the end is you're almost certainly going to get a hawkish cut. So the Fed will cut, and then it will say, well, we have some projections that will tell you we continue to cut at a different pace than we have done so far. But in practice, we are probably going to adopt much more of a wait-and-see approach. And again, I think that reflects the very different economic trajectory between the U.S. and many of the other G10 economies. And even for Japan, it's actually somewhere in the middle. Clearly, the interest rate trajectory is upwards, but the economy has much more of a mix of developments, whereas the U.S. has been pretty consistently strong. And I continue to see that happening into the beginning of next year, at least. So a hawkish cut next week should be on the cards.
Yeah, Ebrahim, I've got to do an audible here. Damian Sassauer's out in Scottsdale. I think he's at the Bad Little Nine today, the Scottsdale National Golf Club. It's really, really highly ranked. It's 9 holes. It's not 18 holes.
But that's plenty for
Damian.
Yeah.
So I got to go Latin America on you, Ebrahim, because Sassauer's not around. I'm looking at Brazilian real out to 6. Is it because Mr. Lula is so ill, or is that something that can be opportunistic for our listeners in global Wall Street?
So I do think Brazil is a very interesting case where, in a global perspective, and even maybe relative to its prominent neighbor Argentina, is at the opposites of investor sentiment. So Argentina recently being a darling, and Brazil suffering from a combination of factors, but they definitely include that there was a sense that the central bank was a little too casual about inflation risks. So I personally do think that we will end up seeing the Brazilian real on a total return basis outperform in 2025. But picking the bottom, of course, in these very volatile currencies can be very treacherous. But nevertheless, I would be on the positive side of Brazilian real returns in 2025. And again, it's an interesting contrast to the prevailing sentiment at present.
Ebrahim, thank you so much. If you and Tina Fordham are in New York together, we would be honored to have both you and Tina Fordham into the studio with us. Mr. Rahbari with Tina Fordham at Fordham Global Insights. A lot of topics there, but that's sort of where, I'm sorry, everybody's focused on their 201k.
Yep.
They're either in this market or they're like, why am I not in this market? And there's all these other stories out there, Paul, that we're ignoring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, Europe flat on its back.
Europe flat on its back.
We saw that from Lagarde yesterday.
Yeah, we did. And again, the ECB cutting 25 basis points yesterday and signaling more rate cuts because their economies there are a little bit weaker, which goes, Tom, to that exceptionalism that people talk about for the U.S. economy.
Dick Van Dyke
99
is 99.
Amazing.
I ask all the younger ones who didn't see it in 1964. The whole fam, Lisa, went to the movies in 1964. I think it cost my father $22, and he had a modest coronary. Watch his body language in any, Mary Tyler Moore, Mary Poppins, whatever. His body language was second to none. I don't even think it was rehearsed. It's like Jim Carrey. For the younger crew,
exactly
he
right.
was the Jim Carrey before
point,
Jim Carrey.
Yep.
I'm editorializing there, but 99 years old.
Good for him.
Just extraordinary.
Still bringing it.
We say good morning to all of you. We're 1 hour away from a really, really wonderful treat. These guys don't talk to each other. Gene Munster, Dan Ives, a great respect for each other. A very different approach to looking at Mag 7. Paul demands we start with Tesla. You're loving the Tesla. You loaded the boat. When?
Sure.
Labor Day?
The stock is back, baby. It's tough to keep that one down.
Do you think they gave Belichick like 2,000 shares of Tesla to close the deal?
Yeah, and floor seats at Carolina basketball games.
Yeah, you have to see him there. Yep. With much more for you, Dan Ives and Gene Munster in the next hour together on YouTube. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, a positive sign to the end of the week with futures advancing. Bank of America says U.S. equity funds headed for a record annual inflows at $480 billion. NASDAQ futures right now up 0.7%, 170 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 55 points. And S&P futures rising 0.3%, or 21 points. We have the two-year yield, 4.21%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the euro, that's up about 0.2%. It strengthened after the ECB sounded a little bit less dovish on rates than expected. And France's President Emmanuel Macron named a new prime minister. The dollar steady, on track for a second straight week of gains. That's against a number of currencies, including the Japanese yen, which is weaker, the pound weaker as well. Few companies making news. That's Cantor. It's agreed to pay $6.75 million to settle some SEC allegations that it misled investors in 2 blank check firms before their stock market debuts. And Boeing said it's going to invest $1 billion and hire about 500 workers in South Carolina. That's to expand its manufacturing of that 787 Dreamliner. And meantime, Boeing delays mean President-elect Donald Trump, well, he's not going to fly on a new Air Force One at any point in his second term.
Wow.
That's according to the Wall Street Journal. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Joining us now, Karen Mana. She's the Federated Hermes on fixed income, on clipping coupons, on total return. Karen, forward, is 2025 a year of total return in bills, notes, and bonds?
I think it's more a year of clipping coupons, to your quip. Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think we're clipping coupons next year. I'm not expecting too much price action out of a very favorable Fed.
Do bond portfolios rebalance? I mean, Paul has like an Nvidia rebel coming up. He owns so much Nvidia. In your world, Karen, do you rebalance once a year, twice a year?
No, we're more looking at the portfolio day to day and remaining in the constructs of the framework that we've developed as a team. So you're looking at the portfolio and you're keeping it aligned with our duration call or our views on interest rates. Right now we're neutral, right? We don't think that we can add a ton of value in calling rates one side or the other. You're holding your sector allocations in a multi-sector portfolio, and you're having the ideas and themes of the analyst and traders resonate through the portfolio, i.e. going into 25, you're going to be looking at your sector allocations for the Trump trade, domestic better than multinational. And then you're going to be looking at the underlying securities to select those that best exhibit the themes. So with the Trump administration, the common thought is that less regulation is upside for companies. But to me, it gives them the opportunity to make great decisions, but also to make some poor ones. And that's going to be the M&A. So I think the themes going into next year that will drive portfolio performance are not so much a rebalancing. That's tough to do in fixed income. You can't always go back to the shelf for what you held before or what you'd like to have. But we're going to be looking at those underlying names and selecting those that have an environment where they can prosper.
Hey, Karen, how much credit risk are you taking as you think about 2025? I mean, you can sit in the 2-year Treasury and get 4.2%, but yet, boy, the high yield, the leverage loans, both of those over 8% total return this year. it feels like I need to take some credit risk out there.
It does if you look at yields, but we are value-oriented investors at our core. That is the fabric of Federated Hermes. Most of us on the team started as credit analysts or structured review analysts, and that's at the fundamentals of what we do. So in high yield, at 300 basis points over on average, you can pick your index there and quibble over a few basis points, but we just don't think that you're being adequately compensated for the potential risk.
Karen, you started out at Fidelity in real estate. Is there an opportunity in bills, notes, bonds, and debt in real estate? I mean, have we cratered so much that you can get some real bond alpha out of commercial real estate?
I think you could. REITs in particular, some corners of real estate. Again, you're going to be selective, you're going to be value oriented, you're going to be discerning. But REITs are a nice investment, again, in this part of the economy where you're going to look for more domestic rather than multinational.
Karen, thank you so much. Karen Mountain with us, Federated Hermes today. We've got to go to our movie analyst, Paul Sweeney. No, it's not Moana 2. Does it have legs or anything like that? We had a combo yesterday. Mm-hmm. We had Warner Brothers Discovery doing what you talked about like a year and a half ago, where they're going to split up because they need to go to streaming to compete with YouTube TV. And then I get a love note from YouTube TV at 10:05 a.m.
Yep.
Popping me from $72 to $82.
Where did that number come from? How are you paying that kind of money for? What are you getting for $72?
Well, I got the HP 12C here, folks. I'll get off.
I mean, it's like you're paying $72. I mean, that's a cable bill that you're paying, Tom. I don't know what you're getting for that.
82
Tom's going to his HP 12C, folks.
$984 for what?
I don't know. I mean, I know they got great stuff on YouTube TV, but
Lisa, do you have YouTube TV at home?
No, my son does, and he won't give me his password. But
whoa, now he's paying for it though. Okay, that's
but now
good.
He's going to pay more.
So Lisa Matteo's not paying for it because Lisa Matteo is the CFO of the Matteo household. We know that.
They need estate planning at the Matteo household. But I mean, seriously, the combination of Warner Brothers Discovery finally doing what everybody was begging about.
Yep.
And then YouTube, is this what we're going to see, Paul, where everybody goes up?
It is. And everybody's saying basically we need to get to profitability in our streaming businesses. So how do you do that? It's very simple. More subscribers, and you charge more for those subscribers. And that's your subscription revenue. That's 80% of your revenue. The other 20% might be advertising.
Right.
And Netflix has done it. Disney is now doing it. They are profitable, but everybody else is chasing the profitability. And Warner Brothers Discovery, what they did yesterday is they said, all right, from a reporting standpoint, let's break up how we report our business. One is our streaming business plus our studio. We'll put that in one bucket because people like that bucket. And then we'll put our linear cable networks in another bucket. People may not like that bucket.
I'm going back to Chrysler when they restructured a million years ago. They have 66.5% in debt. They're going to dump the debt on the dog company, not on streaming. They're going to put all the debt over on whatever the debris is.
They're 4 times. Here's how the Wall Street looks at media companies: net debt to EBITDA, and they're about 4 times net debt to EBITDA. That's not terrible, but it's not great. Wall Street would love these media companies to be 3 times or even a little bit less than 3 times. So they've done a great job of paying off their debt. They were at $52 billion in debt just 2 years ago. Now they're at $40 billion in debt. So they're doing a good job there. They have tons of free cash flow. But now what Wall Street wants to see from Warner Brothers Discovery and from Paramount is become profitable in streaming. Like Disney has just become profitable in their streaming business.
Who decides, who allocates the debt when you split up one company? Is it like the board?
Sure.
Is it
Tom.
They bring in Michael Barr or McKinsey or
they brought me back in the day, and but you would be the board and the C-suite, the executives. And again, you kind of know what the debt profile should be. You talk to a lot of your creditors. You talk to the rating agencies. What kind of capital structure would you like to see on this business? What kind of capital structure would you like to see on that business? And that's kind of how they do it. So it was a nice move by Warner Brothers Discovery. The ultimate move, Tom, would be what Comcast has done, which is Comcast is literally spinning out its cable networks into a separate
MSNBC
company.
And all that.
Yep.
Now, I notice here on the Bloomberg folks, you do this under MGMT.
Ooh, nice.
Dr. John Carl Malone,
right.
83 years old,
Yep.
16 years at Worn Out Brothers.
Yep.
Okay, is this like Malone saying enough? Let's go.
It's part of it, yeah. I mean, John Malone, I think by his own admission, has overstayed his welcome on some of these media content assets, and maybe even the cable assets at Charter as well here. But that's what he does. He's in these businesses. He's been in them for 60, 70 years. So the question is kind of what does he do with these? And he's trying to, kind of separate them out, let the market value them on their own, and then that'll give him more liquidity in the future if and when he wants to sell some of these things.
Paul Sweeney there on Warner Brothers splitting up, and to say the least, widely anticipated. You got to believe we may see a lot more of this as they search for profitability. He mentions Comcast there with their challenges in spinning off selected assets. Futures up 21, a nice lift to the market. Let me get the percentage here. NASDAQ 100 up 0.8%. Michael Barr looking at the VIX, 13.39. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Emmanuel Macron picked Francois Bayrou to be France's new prime minister, calling on a long-standing centrist ally to navigate a fractured political landscape that toppled the previous administration. Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll says there is a long history involved in the French politics.
And he's someone who has been a supporter of Emmanuel Macron since he was first elected president. Actually was seen as key at getting him to the Elysee in 2017 in the first place, not from his own party, but from the centrist grouping. So that sets us up for a very interesting set of conversations about what happens next in France, because Modem, the party that Francois Bayrou is part of, is already part of Macron's centrist coalition. So he didn't pick someone from one of the left-wing parties to try and bring in the Socialist Party to reinforce the number of votes he has in the National Assembly.
Bloomberg Stephen Carroll. Luigi Mangione, the man suspected of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, wasn't a member of its insurance plans, according to a company spokesperson. Meanwhile, ABC reports prosecutors are now bringing evidence before a grand jury seeking an indictment to strengthen their case for Mangione to be extradited from Pennsylvania to New York. Winter storms in Michigan dumped more snow on the northern and western parts of the state and Upper Peninsula. Numerous accidents, people stranded. The third major snowstorm for the regions within about 2 weeks. Authorities say a wildfire burning near Malibu, California is now 30% contained, and evacuation orders were lifted in some areas. Cal Fire says the blaze has destroyed at least 4 homes, damaged at least 6 others, and this newlywed couple lost their home.
Seeing your place, your house with all your stuff in it, aflame is just really crazy.
All over Malibu, crews are still repairing power lines. Finally, the San Francisco 49ers lost to the Los Angeles Rams 12-6. Global
Is the
news.
couch in the
9
living
innings?
room long enough for you?
No.
It's not long enough for you.
Well, there are so many.
It used to be a love seat.
Well, she couldn't say much. My wife, by the way, in case y'all don't know, big 49ers fan. Yeah. She couldn't say much because the 49ers linebacker, Devondre Campbell, just quit. He just quit in the middle of the daggone game.
What happens? Do we know, do they release him?
Well, here's what if you release him, he still gets his salary. So then you kind of reward that. But if you suspend him for maybe a game or two without pay, that could change everything.
I'm really pumped for Bills. I forgot to bring my Bills head in just to bust Michael Barr's chops. But the remaining Buffalo Bills schedules, the Lions and arguably the game of the season, then they really have a tough final 3 games. The Patriots, the Jets, and the Patriots.
Ooh.
Meanwhile, the Lions are playing the Vikings.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to go with the Bills with that year-ending schedule.
Man.
They got to have the easiest final 3 games in football.
That Vikings-Lions game, I'm telling you, the Vikings are tough. They are really tough. And I'm scared. I'm not going to lie. I'm scared about it.
Should Juan Soto have gone to the New York Jets? Would he have helped him out?
Yeah, meet the Met. Juan Soto, he's a happy camper. So
are you scarred on that, Paul?
No,
like when you see a Mets uniform?
No problem at all. No problem.
I told Scott Havens was running the show.
The Yankees are going to reload. They'll be fine.
I have never recovered from 1986. And when I can't, I'm sure, you feel about it with Detroit and whatever, Michael, but I don't think normally about the New York Mets. I'm embarrassed. I need therapy.
You still look at him as little brother.
No, I look at him like Lenny Dykstra hit the ball off oil canned Boyd. The ball's still going over Everett now. It gets in the way of flight patterns coming out of Logan. We'll have to see. Futures up 22. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have NASDAQ futures leading the gains following losses by all three major indexes. Traders turning their focus to the Fed's policy meeting next week. Economists are telling Bloomberg News officials will lower interest rates this month for a third straight time and pare back the number of rate cuts they anticipate next year. NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 173 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 61 points. S&P futures advancing 0.3%, 21 points. The two-year yield, 4.2220%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is down about 0.1%. Few companies making news. Well, the Container Store preparing to file for bankruptcy in the coming weeks. And then you have Heineken. They have named former ASML CEO Peter Wenick as chairman. And yes, shares of Warner Brothers Discovery erasing some of the gains. They're falling down 1% this morning after climbing 15% yesterday after announcing it was restructuring into two divisions. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney are getting to the market. Let's talk a little bit here about Dan Ives and Gene Munster. Gene at Piper Jaffray for years.
Yep.
Holding court, off on his own, a couple different ventures. Ives, they gave him a new title. 6-7 weeks ago. And, Ives is a force of its own. And both of them, in their own way, have a lot of critics, particularly Ives is like a piñata, except the stocks keep going up.
Yeah, the criticism is a perma bull, but what's wrong with being a perma bull over the last 25 years when technology has just exploded in terms of a percent of GDP? It's a simple call when you think about it in hindsight.
Right.
Yes, 2022, when you have a correction in the markets, tech's going to take a bigger hit, so your tech call is going to get hit. But It's just he's just saying, hey, both.
What are you going to
focus
focus on with it? What are you going to focus on?
My thing is kind of AI. It seems like kind of that the hypiness is past it, i.e., AI is great. I just need to be exposed to AI. What's the return on investment? How are we going to make money?
We don't know.
AI? We don't know.
I don't think we know.
So how do we play that? They will know.
Ives will be useless.
Yes,
But,
exactly. So
I'm going to talk to him about the persistency of free cash flow.
Yep.
And the financials here.
Absolutely.
I called Gina Martin Adams up. She was shutting down a bar in Copenhagen.
Yeah, I know.
When I got her.
She's a player.
And I said, Gina, what should I ask Dan Ives? And so she straightened me out on that. Futures up 21.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
The daily look at the front pages, the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. What's it like to be mentioned on the Costco conference call? That was pretty cool,
Imagine
Lisa.
that. Yes, those Costco earnings this morning. All right, we've got so much to get through for today, and I'm glad it's back up to an hour from a minute and a moment. So here we go. We're starting off with the battle between human and robot ride-hailing drivers at airports. We're talking about Waymo One, okay? They're owned by Alphabet. They already offer airport trips in Phoenix. They're waiting approval, in other markets. I don't know if I would take one. I'm still on the fence about it. But if its robo-taxis continue expanding, experts are telling Business Insider, here's the thing, human ride-hailing drivers, they could see their incomes take a big hit as these robots start to come in. They're some of the most profitable trips for them, right? They often have higher fares, strong customer demand. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
And the Uber and Lyft drivers are telling them that their gigs are already less profitable.
If the robot thing gets through the traffic, it's got to make that turn off the bridge onto the FDR.
Good luck.
It's got to make that turn. It's like Junior Helix over on the Upper East Side.
I mean, I got in
the
the car this morning with some dude I've never seen before in my life at 4:30 in the morning. What's the difference between getting in with a robot car? I don't know.
It's a human.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who this guy is.
I'm more comfortable with the human. I don't
Next.
know. Oh, gosh. Okay, so Tokyo planning a 4-day work week for city employees, okay? They want to reverse their low birth rate. That's the whole reason behind it.
So if I'm working less, I'm procreating more?
No, the thing is, that's a good way to think about it. But they're saying it'll make the work-life balance better, so that they'll have more time to take care of the children. So that's the whole reason behind it, because they're on track. 16th consecutive year of decline for their population. So again, this is city employees. This is for April of 2025. But the way it works, it lets them adjust their working hours to free up one day, so they get to choose what day that is.
Afterthoughts trying to get me to go to a 6-day work week.
That's 6 days.
That's where we are. I tried to get her to empty the dishwasher last night. Went down in flames.
Good luck with that. I had the same fight.
All right, this story I am very concerned about.
Did you notice when you went to... Okay, well, this is British pubs, okay?
Yep.
British pubs running out of Guinness, okay?
Wow.
Huge story. This is the New York Times. Apparently, the parent company, Diageo, they've limited the amount of beer that the UK wholesalers, distributors can buy each week because of the surging demand, because they're fearing this shortage coming up. The reason they're fearing a shortage is because Guinness was once this old-timers beer, right? But it's become popular with Gen Z. Those are those drinkers up to 27, from drinking age to 27. It's been this marketing push they've been pushing there. They've had celebrity endorsements, but there's also this viral drinking challenge, okay? It's called Split the G. I don't really understand it, but it means that you drink enough in one chug to leave the foam with the first letter of the branding pint glass.
Who thought of that?
Apparently, this is this challenge going on.
All right, I was just at the Dublin brewery for Guinness back in September. There's like 3 dudes there making the whole stuff. It's not that big, and it's amazing with the stuff they put out there. I mean, it's just an incredible trip if you're ever in Dublin. Check out the Guinness brewery. But I guess the kids are drinking it now.
What's it called? The G?
The split the G. Split the G. Yes, the Guinness, the G.
Lisa, I learn something every day. Next.
I'm telling you, wealth of knowledge here. Okay, the last one. Oh, this is the bane of my existence. Okay, this is the cookie chain that teen girls are helping power to $1 billion in sales.
No idea what you're talking about. No idea what you're talking about.
Oh, Paul Sweeney, Crumble. It's those $5 700-calorie cookies.
Really?
That are huge.
Where do you get them?
You can get them in the store, but my DoorDash bill has just been skyrocketing from these things. So similar to Guinness, they're using the power of like social media and these TikTok challenges and things. So TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. It has a 30-plus person social media team, okay? 9.6 million TikTok followers. If you compare that, you say, how much is that? Starbucks only has 2.2 million, okay? So they do this thing, weekly menu changes. So instead of having the same cookies, each week they highlight a new cookie. So it keeps the interest going.
They're not on top. The social people, they misspelled it. But other than
yeah,
that,
exactly. CRUMBL.
The raspberry butter cake cookie.
Yes.
It's a mouth-watering butter cake cookie. Oh, gets this down at the bottom. It says, accept all cookies. I love that. Cute. Okay, Crumble. Like, have you been, Lisa?
I have been, and I have seen it arrive at my doorstep plenty of times.
Really?
Yes, it's the teen girls. They're all about this. They're posting reviews, and then Crumble repost those reviews. So then they think they're like, hey, I'm famous now. So it's fueling this whole thing with the girls. I'm telling you. But the way this company started, I mean, 2017, it was a single store in Logan, Utah, and it just kind of blew up.
It's out of Logan, Utah.
Wow.
Logan,
How
Utah,
big is their social media team?
30-plus person social media. So we got to work on ours.
I hope Sparta's listening. Say it one more time for Sparta. How big is their social media team?
30-plus. How many is ours? One?
We got 2 interns, and one of them isn't here because they went to a party last night. So we're sort
of
going.
All right.
Crumble. I'm telling you,
you
have to check it out.
No E.
Like 700
Is there one
calories
nearby
a pop.
where we can go today and I can have a...
Sure, we can DoorDash it right here.
Yeah, exactly. I got the Redo Amex.
Yeah. The semi-sweet chocolate chunk.
How much is that? Oh, God.
I'm
telling you.
They're like at the calories next to it. I mean,
Lisa Mateo, thank you for the Lisa Mateo Hour and our newspapers. What do you do on a Friday before the holidays? You don't you don't play Andy Williams. You don't play Bob Goulet. You play Joe Cocker. That's the way we roll.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. In this hour, we're going to have an adult showing up for the first part of the hour. Really? Dan Ives and Gene Munster later in the hour on your interview of the day for Global Wall Street on Mag 7. But first, the single best guy I know on profits linking in to our economy, Stephen Whiting of Citigroup. He's like the anti-couture of Dan Ives.
Yep.
I mean, it's
like on a Friday, my man is in a suit, tie,
but it's like
button down.
It Savile Row? It's like a London look. I mean, he's over there. Jane Fraser doesn't know it's on the Amex over at Citi, but Whitey, dressed to the nines. Dan Ives will brighten us up later as well. We said good morning on a Friday, an eventful Friday as well. Best part of the last hour was Paul Sweeney on streaming and all this. YouTube TV raised their prices. Where's Michael Nathan?
Are you going to pay for this?
No. I said no one watches it. I watch Bills Lions. That's about it.
I don't know.
I don't get it.
Not even kennel fee?
No, well, they do. But that's on YouTube. We watch like dog videos on YouTube and little squirrels in the forest. We do that. I mean, it's the way we roll. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, this important tech hour, it's brought to you by Kona Haque Advisory, Assurance Tax. Is your business future ready? Talk to Kona Haque's digital advisory team about strategies and platforms to drive competitive advantage. Major December shout out to Kona Haque for their support through the year. Let's get to the Interactive Brokers Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
And we've got tech stocks leading the charge. Shares in Broadcom, that's a chip supplier for Apple, other big tech companies, up 17%. Predicted a boom in demand for its AI chips. So we have NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 182 points. Dow futures gaining 0.1%, 56 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 23 points. The 2-year yield, 4.20%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 1 basis point. We have Europe's stock 600 right now, down about 0.2% after President Emmanuel Macron names Francois Bayrou to be France's new prime minister. Two currencies, want to check in with the euro, up 0.4%. We have the dollar. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. We have the Japanese yen, that is weaker, and the British pound is weaker. We have Bitcoin up about 0.5% at just over 100,000. To earnings we go. It's shares of furniture company RH, formerly Restoration Hardware. They're up about 14%, swung to a quarterly profit. And yes, Costco posted quarterly profit, beat expectations, healthy consumer spending. The company also said Americans swapping dinners out for nights in because its meat and produce sales have soared. Shares have been back and forth all morning. Right now, they are little changed. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Again, this is a wonderful hour. Dana Peterson's going to show up on the economic equation, but we have Stephen Whiting of Citigroup in before Dan Ives and Gene Munster. Mr. Whiting is with Citi Global Wealth. The number one theme I have is I'm watching earnings and free cash flow. You're the best I know at linking the corporate world. It's like chapter 18, folks, in a 23-chapter Econ 101 textbook. Okay. Whiting owns the high ground in this. Do you believe in double-digit earnings growth?
Look, we don't have forecasts for double-digit earnings growth. We have high single-digit earnings growth for the next 2 years. And, I would say this is a more nascent recovery for corporate profits than it is an economic recovery, right? We've, had a lot of growth. We've slowing the labor market. Slack is appearing in the labor market. But corporate profits a year behind us were lousy. They were down for more than half of sectors. 2023 is, ancient history now. But if you think about it, that was a year in which corporate profits ex Mag 7 were minus 7%. So could it be that we are getting to a solid reading 2 years later? I think so. So I think that we are seeing obviously really strong tech earnings. If you want to think about it, we're managing to grow CapEx, massive growth rate, 30-some%, right, for AI-related CapEx for hyperscalers. Yet the companies that are doing it are still expanding their margins. That is going on. It can only go on for so far. But many other companies in other industries and around the world are going to have better results because their results have been lousy just behind them, right? So there's room for growth in earnings.
So is there valuation, is there opportunities outside of the U.S. versus the U.S.? Because I know it's cheaper,
yes,
Europe and UK, but there's just not the growth there.
Cheaper is not necessarily a catalyst. Look, our own asset allocation, we've taken down large cap Europe, for example, and we think that trade linkages and risks are significant enough, growth is slow enough that it's not something to feature. I think broadly, Asia, generally speaking, and we're not talking about China specifically so much, but the fastest EPS growth of region in the world is Asia this year. And if you think about valuation, when Donald Trump was first elected, if you think about from that point to now, equities outside the rest of the world have fallen 40% in value in US dollar terms. Now, does that mean anything good? Well, think about 2017 to 2019. We had trade wars, 200 basis points of Fed tightening, inverted yield curve, non-US equities at 13% returns per year in those 3 years. And that was at a much higher valuation than we're at today.
So interesting. So, I mean, as we think about the U.S. market, are there valuation concerns there?
Well,
How concerned are you about
yeah,
valuations
I think,
in the US?
13% return for the S&P 500 for a decade.
Yep.
Come on.
I'll take.
It's
Okay,
like,
but this gets to the heart of the matter. Steve Whiting is not into market timing. You're not going to come here and say go to cash.
No, but
what does an equity person do who's missed sort of kind of like the last 24 months, 36 months?
Yeah, so look, a lot of people missed it because they thought that we had to have a second economic downturn. We already did. I just mentioned 23 was lousy. Financial conditions were terrible in 2022. But if you look at the decade behind us, small and mid-cap growth companies had falling valuations, trading lower in valuation than their long-term average, as opposed to large cap tech with AI behind it, trading a third higher than their long-term valuation. And by the way, have outgrown. 10% EPS growth has gotten you a decline in valuation for small and mid-cap growth companies. So we're not talking Russell 2000. We're not just seeing any leveraged, failing company, but growing companies that have fallen off the radar, that are not multi-trillion-dollar companies. Those companies have a lot of value in the U.S. market.
Citi, private wealth clients. You've got clients all over the world. You travel all over the world talking to these people. What are they asking you these days?
They're mostly asking about U.S. stocks. It's like the world has become a home-biased American investor.
I know. Is it like 70% of the market cap in the world is in the U.S.? I mean, it's
record high. And look, the 20% outperformance of U.S. equities in the past year sounds like a lot. It's not outrageous given the factors that we understand of what's driven. I mean, we have AI, we have obviously all of this, but it's been 15 years of outperformance, right? A record long stretch.
But this is really, really interesting. The heritage of John Reed and Citigroup. Now to Jane Fraser trying to really right-size the bank, and you know all the internal stuff we're not going to talk about on this show. But the answer is you have international written all over you in spades. When Steve Whiting flies into Paris or into Hanoi, what do you say to international clients of Citigroup about American exceptionalism?
That we've been paying an ever more exceptional price for that in valuation. That certainly it's warranted that we have had faster EPS growth, more innovative industries across a larger number of larger companies. I think right now there's a lot of concerns about the toll the U.S. will have on the rest of the world in terms of tariffs. We'll be watching this very closely, but a lot of this gets very discreetly priced. And like I mentioned, 2017 to 2019, the trade wars did not stop the world from having some success. And, we're going to be, you talk about Fed watching, this is going to be Trump watching, right? We're going to be in watching U.S. policy and to see whether it's over or underpriced in different industries every day.
Let's dovetail Steve Whiting into the wonderful work this year of Andrew Hollenhorst talking about rates higher and then for longer, and I know you're coming down now. It's Citigroup, but the answer is you got to have a nominal GDP call. Does nominal GDP slip under 4%? Or is it still this solid America the president?
I don't think it slips under 4%. One of the things that we just wrote about in a bulletin, a weekend bulletin, was reflexivity. We now have a...
What are we, George Soros with us this hour?
Okay. Well, think about this. I mean, we've had a really strong rise in business confidence. You go take a look at the NFIB survey, for December that showed the share of small business owners that think that the economy will improve, maybe just getting tax and regulatory uncertainty out of the way. And it's been a very, very sharp rise. Now, financial markets, well, how much have we priced this in? Like I said, it's been much more of a big cap than a small cap phenomenon.
Okay, but is it also because the Lions are 12-1?
Don't ask me.
Okay, it's not about the Jets and the Giants, is it? It's the Lions are 12-1. It's morning in America. Steve Whiting, Citigroup, thank you so much. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. French President Emmanuel Macron today named centrist ally Francois Bayrou as prime minister after a historic parliamentary vote ousted the previous government last week. Nairu's political experience is seen as key in efforts to restore stability, as no single party holds a majority at the National Assembly. We're learning more about the suspect accused of killing United Health Group executive Brian Thompson. Bloomberg's John Tucker reports.
As it turns out, Luigi Mangione wasn't a member of United Health's insurance plans. It seems to dispel the idea the shooting he's accused of was motivated by a grievance from his personal experience with the nation's largest health insurer. Mangione was arrested in Pennsylvania Monday with a manifesto referencing the company's size, inaccurately describing United Health as the fourth largest company by market value. Mangione remains in Pennsylvania fighting extradition to New York, but Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg says he's confident the 26-year-old will be extradited.
We intend to learn more, and we have a lot of things to do, and as things go forward, there may be additional charges to bring.
Since the shooting, people speculated about whether the gunman was a customer upset over a denied medical claim. Now it appears that his grievances were more broad-based. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
The sudden discovery of an American who'd been held prisoner in Syria for entering illegally brought joy to his family, though no one seemed to know that he was missing or being held. The fall of the Assad regime brought the release of thousands of captives in Syria, and the surprise someone from Missouri was among them. Travis Timmerman's mother, Stacy Gardner.
Every day was hard for me. At the church, I was crying, and I try not to, but you can't help it.
Meanwhile, it's been over 12 years since Houston native Austin Tice was kidnapped while reporting on Syria's civil war. His family hopes that the regime change will bring about his release and freedom. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Gene Munster, Dana Ives coming up. Dana
Yep.
Peterson with us before that with a careful look at the American consumer. You said that yesterday. I thought you nailed that. Look, at 70% of the public, and we're in some form of consumption boom.
Yeah.
How do holiday sales look?
I mean, we talked to the Dana Telsleys of the world, Tom. They're talking low single-digit increase in retail sales. I mean, okay. And I think that's kind of where we are here. So there is that K-shaped economy out there, Tom, that we talked about for the last several years, quite frankly.
Costco out with earnings.
Yep, absolutely.
Lisa's been very quiet this morning.
Yeah. The Walmart numbers were good, I thought, a couple weeks ago.
Good.
So
they're trading at 30-something times.
I know.
earnings.
It's a growth stock. I don't know.
This was not in CFA level 5.
No, it's all e-marketing is what I'm told.
It's like social.
Yeah.
Because Crumble has a social media team of 30.
You have to be I think Tom's an influencer, quite
30,
frankly.
Yeah. Well, Lisa can influence. Bloomberg Surveillance. Stay with us.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a strong end to the week on Wall Street. Traders looking ahead to the final Federal Reserve interest rate decision of the year. NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 186 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 64 points. S&P futures, well, they're up 0.3%, 23 points. The two-year yield, 4.20%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.34%. That's up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.5%, $73 a barrel. WTI crude, $70 a barrel. We have spot gold down 0.5% at $2,665 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.1%. Few companies making news. Cantor agreed to pay $6.75 million. That's to settle SEC allegations that it misled investors in 2 blank check firms. That was before their stock market debuts. And Elon Musk renewed his feud with the SEC. He's revealing that the agency is investigating Neuralink and may take action over his investments in Twitter. And in other news, Musk also looking to turn the site where SpaceX builds its rockets into a new city. SpaceX filed to move its headquarters from Hawthorne, California, to the location in Boca Chica, Texas. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I love that name, Boca Chica. Yeah,
yes,
cool.
In Texas.
Very cool.
Where is it? Is it like Corpus Christi? Is it?
I don't know.
Abilene?
I'm guessing it's in the middle of nowhere.
Jess Menton would know.
Ed Ludlow would know because he's our space reporter for Bloomberg Television.
Is he?
Yes, he is.
Oh, he's on baby duty now.
Is he? Okay, so he's not doing any of this stuff now. Okay, very good for him.
For like a year and a half.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's how they roll.
He's got to get the kid.
Southern tip of Texas. Thanks,
Thank
Ari.
you. Ari,
Like Ari's ever been to the southern tip of Texas, dude? Never. Okay.
Good morning to Corpus Christi. We've got some wonderful fans down there. Greatly appreciate it. Okay, this is important. We've got this, we had Steve Whiting in, and we've got Dan Ives and Gene Munster coming in. We get some peace here on what really matters, which is the 70% of the American economy, the consumer. Dana Peterson joins now, chief economist at the Conference Board. And the Conference Board, I can't say enough about the heritage.
Great work.
Out of one of the really difficult times here, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire before World War I. It's a venerable organization,
really?
And they carry that with them each and every day. Dana, how is the Conference Board different from every other economic shop?
Well, we're different because we're nonpartisan. We don't have an axe to grind. We like to give people the facts and help them to understand it.
What do you understand now about the American consumer? The, not exuberance, but the effervescence right now is tangible. Does it continue?
I think it does, as long as consumers continue to work. And certainly our own consumer confidence measure signals that consumers are saying that it's very easy to find a job right now, and they expect that to be so in 6 months. So as long as consumers feel confident that they will be working, they're happy to spend. They're spending on goods, services, they're going on vacation.
Then why does it feel like two Americas? The one you just described, and there's a lot of angst out there from people saying it's not nearly as rosy as what Dana Peterson says.
Well, there's the other half of that coin, and that's inflation. While the pace of inflation has slowed significantly, prices are still a lot higher now than they were pre-pandemic. Inflation bites everyone, and that's what consumers are feeling. Yes, they have higher wages, they're taking home more money, but it's going back to the store in the form of inflation. And I think that's what's concerning many consumers.
Yeah, that's right, Dana. I think that's kind of what we hear from a lot of folks out there. Is there a time when that kind of plays out, when we stop saying, boy, my supermarket bill is a lot higher than it used to be? Because one could argue we're almost 5 years into the onset of the pandemic and the inflation resulting therefrom. Is there a point where this becomes less of an issue for people?
I think once people get used to it. So, for example, with the housing market, there's a whole generation of folks who never owned a home, and they don't remember 3% mortgages, and they're saying, well, I guess this is what the environment looks like. The mortgage is going to be 5-6%, but I still don't want to buy that house. So they go for it. And that's what we're seeing more of, people just kind of resigning themselves to this is the new normal.
And so, Dana, I mean, the labor market, by all measures is still very, very strong, very vibrant. It seems like if people want a job, they can get a job. Wages are rising now at a faster rate than inflation. How do you characterize the labor market these days?
I think the labor market's super robust. We're still seeing job gains. November was really outsized. Yes, we had a bit of a payback from the hurricane-related weakness, but again, people are working. Many companies are still hiring, or they're at least holding on to their workers. When we ask CEOs what they're planning to do, 75% say we're going to hire or basically hoard our labor force.
Frame out your real GDP 12 months out and overlay inflation to a nominal GDP number. What does the conference board see?
Well, 4%. So that'd be 2% GDP and then 2% inflation. So we hope that happens, although there are very many risks that could cause inflation to be higher than we expect and also growth to be lower.
But is that your definition of a solid economy? Or am I like, OMG, the COVID boom is over and we're slowing down?
Well, we've already kind of slowed down to, I think, what's a new normal, and we'll probably get there next year with 2% growth. That's quite strong. The key thing is just keeping the unemployment rate low.
Yeah. Is there a wealth effect, Dana Peterson? I mean, are people looking at, like Sweeney's looking at his Nvidia going, I can afford the Sphere and the Eagles because I made it large? Is there a wealth effect out there going on?
Well, for those who own financial assets, yes, there is a wealth effect. If you own a home, your home prices have almost doubled. If you own stocks, they continue to rise. The bond market, it's in and out, but things are, I think, well for those who have assets. But for folks who don't have assets, they're probably not as excited. But still, they may look at the strength of the stock market as an indicator that their job is going to be there and that they're going to prosper.
This is dead on. What you just heard, folks, from Ms. Peterson is so important. We look at like the haves and the have-nots, and we look at the paycheck, which makes sense.
Yep.
But there's also the haves and the have-nots with assets, and that's not nearly discussed as it should be. Dana Peterson, thank you so much. Chief Economist at the Conference Board. We now go, Lisa Mateo and Tom Keene. Lisa, join me here as we speak to the only one with a life on the surveillance team, Paul Sweeney. Last night, Madison Avenue.
Sure.
Cafe Carlisle, success?
76th Street, Cafe Carlisle. We saw Tony Danza with his rendition of some of Sinatra's best tunes, and he was phenomenal. What's interesting about him was he actually, when he got to know Frank Sinatra back in the day, and so he had some great stories about being around Sinatra back in the 80s. Tony Danza's mother, huge fan coming out of Brooklyn of Frank Sinatra. Tony Danza was able to introduce, she was a Bobby Soxer back in the day, so Tony Danza was able to introduce his mother to Frank several times during Tony's early career. So just a great night. And again, the Cafe Carlisle, Tom, I think is just quintessential New York City. It's just it's one of those things like going to the U.S. Open tennis. If you got to do it.
Okay, I got to cut to the chase because I know what I always have. Folks, I've darkened the door at the Carlisle a few times. There you go. Did you have the caviar?
Oh, boy.
Osseterry Gold at market price?
No, I did not. But I had a very nice steak frites, Tom.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and we had a nice bottle of Burgundy that I had Sam Fazeli look at the wine list for me. I gave him on the phone from Bloomberg Intelligence. He lives in Bordeaux, France. And he picked out the wine for me, which set me back a couple of shekels. But it was
now,
worth it.
I have, folks, full disclosure, I'm not doing the caviar. Neither is Lisa. Lisa and I, at Babbelman's, we're doing the homemade pigs in a blanket.
Oh,
but of course.
Did you have those?
I love that.
They're not at market price.
The only thing I requested for my wedding day menu, pigs in a blanket.
You did.
That's it. So the guy's like, we don't do that. We'll do it. Figure it out.
Major shout out. One of the joys of the Carlisle
Cafe
over the
Carlisle.
decades.
Yep.
Luston Harris. He is a phenomenal piano player following up after the
they had a great
iconic
band
Bobby
last
Short.
night. Yep.
76th Street is called the Bobby Short Street, I believe, as well. That's good. Around New York City with Paul Sweeney.
Yep, absolutely.
Lisa, what were we doing? Watching reruns of Gunsmoke?
I didn't even know Tony Danza sang. I'm going to get killed
I know,
for that.
he's very and he tap dances, too.
Futures up 23. Dan Ives, Gene Munster for Global Wall Street. A holiday treat.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. While a positive sign to the end of the week, futures advancing. Bank of America says U.S. equity funds headed for record annual inflows of $480 billion. NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 186 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 59 points. S&P futures, well, they're up 0.3%, 23 points. The two-year yield, 4.19%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.34%, and that's up 1 basis point. To currencies, the euro right now, it is up about 0.4%. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. Little change. The Japanese yen is weaker, down about 0.5%. The British pound weaker, down about 0.1%. Few companies making news. Boeing said it will invest $1 billion. They're going to hire 500 workers in South Carolina, expand manufacturing of its 787 Dreamliner. And shares of Warner Brothers Discovery starting to erase some of the gains from yesterday after it announced that it was restructuring into 2 divisions. Shares are down about 1% after climbing 15% on Thursday. And popularity of weight loss drugs, well, they're sparking a new food label. Are you ready for it? Okay, Conagra Brands is adding GLP-1 friendly to the packaging of some of its healthy choice frozen meals to attract new buyers, according to the Wall Street Journal. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. This is a treat for your year-end, and we say good morning to Global Wall Street across the nation and around the world. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Dan Ives says do that. Gene Munster says do that. Joining us now, Gene Munster in Minneapolis, obviously iconic with Piper Jaffray years ago. Sweeney could join us from Deepwater Asset Management, dressed appropriately. Dan Ives here, a color melange with Aviator. What is it, Aviator? Very nice. It's I'm awake. Gene Munster, I'm going to start with you. Here's Ives. He talks to Barron's yesterday, Adam Clark, and he says Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia will be worth $4 trillion. We're not that far away, are we, Gene Munster? How do they get to $4 trillion? Is it cash flow? Is it earnings? Or is it hype?
I think it's probably 2/3 expanding multiple, and I'll touch on that in a second. I think it's probably 1/3 expanding earnings. When you look at, let's just focus in on Apple, the expectations for this year, surprisingly, are the iPhone growth is 3%. It's come down for 5%. This is for fiscal 25. So that number's been declining. It's 8% for fiscal 26. So I think that there's upside to those numbers. Dan and I can talk about how we get there. But I think that's one piece of it. But the second piece is what I continue to believe. We've talked about this for the past year, this 3 to 5 year bull market. So we're probably in the early part of the second year that's going to continue to go up, and in a spectacular bursting of the bubble. And just to put some quick numbers around this, Tom, is that if you look at the NASDAQ, it's kind of trading mid to highest 20% on next year earnings. At the peak of the dot-com bubble, it traded at 100 times. Now, we're not going to get back to the 100 by any measure. But I think you could see a forward multiple of 50 as just the hype around AI is just going to become intoxicating.
Dan Ives, I got on the Bloomberg Apple free cash flow pre-pandemic $60 billion, and they go out now to $110 billion. My thesis here is everybody's looking at the hype and the Dan Ives romance and Gene Munster flying around, Tim Cook meeting with King Charles. Forget about it. Is it just financial oomph that is making Mag 7 go?
Yeah, and look, I mean, me and Jim talked about this before. The biggest thing is, even when you look at Apple, you're not factoring into numbers the AI services piece. As is essentially a new app store gets built on Apple Intelligence, what that means from a services perspective, we think that could ultimately add 10, 15% more to services. And Tom, that's why I think a year from now, you're looking at $4.5 trillion. What I believe over the coming years, we're going to be talking about $5 trillion market caps as we think about Godfather of AI, Jensen, Nvidia, Apple, and ultimately Microsoft.
So, Gene, I'd love to get your thoughts just kind of, because I know you've covered Apple for a long time. You've seen the product cycle for this company over decades here. How do you frame out for your clients the AI play for Apple?
It's twofold. I think the first is just this kind of the tailwind, what Dan's talking about. I think that injecting AI into 20% of the world's population A couple days ago was a big deal about what they added to the 18.2 upgrade. So I think that first part, Paul, is just this hardware growth. And as I mentioned, the street's at 3%. What does it mean for the business injecting AI into this? This is the first time software, this AI features is really the selling point. I think it can be 8% growth. I think we can have meaningful upside to iPhone over the next year. And then the second phase, Dan touched on it around kind of what happens with the App Store, is that you can see it in the drop-down menu. If you start digging around in 18.2, you can see within the Apple Intelligence menu, there's a point where you can pick which LLM you're using. So they're going to add other LLMs. They will add other ones that are paid for. Okay. So you upgrade, then they'll make more on their App Store. So I think that's the second chapter. Hardware first, second is the App Store.
Gene Munster, Dan Ives with us for this entire half hour. And I've already had 3 emails. Yes, folks, in our next block, we'll cover Tesla. Paul, continue here on Mag 7 X Tesla.
Hey, Dan, we've actually heard over the last, I guess, couple of quarters, investors ask the question of, okay, I get the AI spend. I see the numbers. I got a sense of it's big and it's incremental. How about the return on that investment? That's now a question that people are hearing. How do you talk to your clients about what are we getting for all this spending on AI?
Look, I think if you look at Salesforce.com and you look what's happened in software, they were waiting in line to get into that AI party. While Jensen's on the dance floor, Ellison, of course, Cook. And now, behind those velvet ropes, they're like, Benioff, come on in. Now software is part of the AI part because of the use cases, and that's why it continues to be 10 p.m. in the AI party that goes to 4 a.m.
Okay, I got to switch to Microsoft because, we had this Apple, the world's going to end. China's terrible. Ives is saying shut up and buy it. Munster's saying shut up and buy it. Moonshot Q3, Q4. And it's like Satya Nadella's fallen off the face of the earth. Dan Ives, an update on Microsoft into the quarterly report.
Get the popcorn out because this is just the start of more and more enterprises, sovereigns.
What are they doing right? I thought ChatGPT was troubled.
Because in the backyard of Microsoft are more and more enterprises. They're moving on Copilot, moving to AI from the cloud perspective. This is really what I view as the more and more the catalyst going into next year. The hyperscalers, not just Microsoft. Okay. Gene's talked about it again, Google, Amazon. This is now the second, third derivative of the AI revolution.
Gene Munster on Google, sort of off my radar here. I mean, search, the government's going to go after them. Do you have a confidence in an entire and total Google versus the split up that we hear from both Republicans and Democrats?
I just got to say one thing about Dan for a second before I answer that. No one illustrates as a better language of kind of illustrating what goes on than Dan. So I just appreciate that, the party, because that's exactly what's going on. Google has a seat at that party. They're also behind that red velvet rope that you mentioned.
Gene's getting ready to get into that party too, wearing his purple sports exactly, the 612.
Paul, you got to take the next question. It's too emotional. I'm tearing up here. Oh my God.
So Google, in terms of Google, basically the pressure point on this is I don't think it's around regulation. I don't think anything's going to happen there. I think it's really what happens with search. And coming back to what happened in the September quarter, I think it was the most important search number that Google has had in the last decade. And specifically is that they saw an acceleration in the U.S. after one full quarter of these AI overviews. And so what that meant is by them injecting AI at the top of the search results, that they were still getting more search revenue. And that's kind of keeps what has been keeping investors up at night. The other beautiful part about the Google story is, they have these other bets. I think what happened related to, their quantum computing that had $250 billion in market cap this week. That was probably a little bit of a stretch, but what they have around Waymo, we can talk about it in the next segment, what's going on there, and related to Tesla. But I just think Google's in a great position for this AI party.
Paul, YouTube is on fire. I say they're on fire. On the live chat, thank you, HL. Can't wait for Dan Ives.
I know.
What is that about?
But also, look at Paul's Sports Shack. I think no one's talking about that. I mean,
he does.
This County Donegal, Ireland.
This Sports Shack
even
is
more
next
amazing
level.
is Sweeney's worked 3 Fridays in a row. He's trying to be like the Japanese and get to the 4-day work week to build out the family. Paul, continue.
Hey, Gene, I'm going to ask you to rehash once again. I kind of do it every time you come on because it's so important for our listeners and viewers. put it into context, like you can do AI versus, say, I don't know, the internet, electricity. How big is AI in your mind?
So the framework we use is that at the highest level, what's been the most impactful has been electricity, and we put that at a scale of 0 to 100 at 100. I mean, it's just hard to argue that piece. But I would put mobile at around 25. I think the PC probably around 35 in terms of the importance. I understand these technologies stack on top of each other, but I just think about in terms of value creation, what they can do for investors. I'd put the internet at 50, and I'd put AI at 90, 95, if not for 100. So I think and I just want to frame in one other piece just around this, like, you hear Dan and I talk about this enthusiasm, this party that's going on, and parties have a tendency to end. And when they end, there's a hangover after it. And we're going to have that in terms of a spectacular burst in the bubble. But I think this party is still, appreciate that analogy, Dan. I think the party's still raging. And I just want to give an example. Broadcom this morning, up 17% in the pre-market. They talked about their 2027 numbers, effectively being like 40, 50 billion for their AI revenue was 12 billion. And so this concept that like the hardware companies, the Nvidias, the Broadcoms, that they're going to somehow hit a wall here in late 24, early 25, it's not happening.
I want to get this in because we really want to focus on Tesla here, this incredible call, these two players here. But let me start with you, Dan Ives, and Gene, I want you to pick up on the same thing. I want you to forget about the media. I want to forget about you down in Florida. Belsky's dressed in white. He looks like Nehru at a convention in the 60s. Ives is dressed up looking like a Fruit Loop. And Munster, it's all this romance of media and that. You go into a top 5 long-only buy-side equity shop, and you're talking to heavyweights about their overcommitment to Mag 7. How do they respond, Dan Ives, to your enthusiasm?
The first thing I say is stop trying to find AI in your spreadsheet, because that's how many have missed every transformational tech name in the last 20 years. And two, when you look at what's happening here, it's about some of the parts. Like I would argue like the autonomous piece for Tesla, that's not, and I'd say that's still the most undervalued AI play in the market today, not being fully valued. You look at what the ultimate valuation and what this is going to do from financially for Mag 7 is still massively underappreciated, and it speaks to why I believe next year tech stocks are up another 25%.
Gene Munster, when you go into the CFA crew at a long-only buy-side shop, pick your victim, Federated, Fidelity, whatever. Gene Munster, what's your terminal value? Can you go out 5-year vision, 7-year vision?
Yeah, I think that those are hard to, modeling out 5 years is difficult, but that's ultimately where money is made. And to answer your question on the 5-year vision on this, is I would simplify it just kind of across mega cap, is that they're going to grow faster for longer, simple as that sounds. But again, I think the Broadcom is representative of that. And so when I think about what that value creation is, I'm generally looking like a year, 2 years out. My opinion is, for example, a year from now, Apple is 315. I think that so I think that there's continues to move higher.
Gene Munster with us from Minneapolis today, getting ready for the Vikings this weekend. Dan Ives with us as well. It's really not fair. The only time I've seen the line out the door in our wonderful studio here was the time George Clooney was here. Yeah. And other than that, the people are just out front trying to,
his entourage, the posse.
The entourage and the posse, yeah, they're here. We're going to continue with Dan Ives and Gene Munster. Yes, Paul insists we'll do Tesla. Our economic indicators, big economic week next week with that Fed meeting. Economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. Again, we're going to continue this discussion, slide into the 9 o'clock hour as well on this important Friday. Futures up 23. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got NASDAQ futures leading the gains, and that's following losses by all three major indexes. Traders turning their focus to the Fed's policy meeting next week. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 176 points. Dow futures little changed, up 36. S&P futures up 0.3%, 22 points. The two-year yield, 4.20%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 1 basis point. We have Brent crude up about 0.5%, $73 a barrel. WTI crude, $70 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that's down about 0.1%. Few companies making news. The Container Store preparing to file for bankruptcy in the coming weeks. And then you have Heineken naming former ASML CEO Peter Wennink as chairman. And finally, we talked about Meta, Amazon donating $1 million to President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration fund. Well, now OpenAI CEO Sam Altman reportedly joining in with a personal donation of the same amount. That's according to Fox News Digital. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning across the nation on your commute on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. We're going to continue now. Gene Munster with us and Dan Ives. Thanks for the huge response, particularly out on YouTube. Greatly appreciate that. Dan, I'm going to talk to short on Tesla. You're completely opposed. I got 141,000 employees. I got single-digit revenue growth. I got a PE of maybe 170. How do you equate that to Mag 7 success? How do you get those ratios which tell you south into your call north?
Sure. So I think on Tesla, it continues to really be about autonomous and AI. And when you think about the story going forward, it's going to be at full self-driving penetration, autonomous, and what I've ultimately
So you
believe.
believe that stuff?
Oh, how about this? I think
Paul, let us be respectful. You wouldn't talk to Gene Munster that way.
No, I would not. You're right.
So look, I think over the next 4 to 5 years, there will be a point where Sweeney is getting into a cybercab, no driver, taking him to play golf. That will happen next 4 to 5 years.
All right. I mean, if that happens, that is a whole new game.
But that's our view. And again, the whole issue is that between the Musk-Trump bromance, the reason it's so important for the stock is because now regulation in this country is going to rapidly change in terms of autonomous. And that, we believe, $1 trillion alone for Tesla's valuation just based on autonomous.
Gene, get us up to speed on this. And you come at this from Loop Ventures and Deepwater Asset, where you've really dived into the entrepreneurial part of technology. Do you buy the Ives story?
100%. I mean, I think that the reality is that if you're born today, there's no chance that you're going to, born in the U.S. today, there's no chance that you're going to ever need a driver's license. If you're 8 years old today, there's no chance. And
or Gene, talk about what you talk about, like with your kid, like how you always say, like your kid, like will your kid, yeah.
So I have a daughter. She's 8 years old, and I had a bet just after she was born that she would never have a driver's license. And a couple of weeks ago, I tried the latest version of Tesla FSD for 20 minutes and had a couple interventions. It's not there yet, but it is remarkable the progress it's making. And I think that the whole conversation around Tesla, very few people are actually experiencing how far along they are. And then you layer on top of that the fact that humans are becoming worse drivers. 40,000 plus people lose their lives a year in auto accidents in the U.S. alone. And then you layer on top of that what GM Cruise announced this week, basically backing off from autonomy. It just leaves this wide open opportunity for Tesla to really be, I think, one of the two key players within autonomy. And so I think that that's not fully appreciated in shares of Tesla.
So Dan, when we think about the Tesla story, I mean, part of me, the cynic in me, thinks Elon Musk is trying to get me to take my focus away from bending metal, which is a low margin business, competitive business, to other bets, to use a term, but you think those other bets, like autonomous driving, robo-taxis, are real?
But I view it similar to, like, as Keene's talked about for a decade. It's like with Apple, but originally, and Gene's talked about it as well, you just looked at Apple as a hardware player, smartphone.
Yep.
But what's been the key of the valuation, why it's going to be the first one in the $4 trillion market club? It's because of services. It's because so when you think about Tesla, I would compare autonomous, the software, FSD, to Apple's services relative to that Cupertino story. That's why it's so important. 7 million vehicles out there. You'll have 10 million vehicles over the next year or two. And even when you look at Waymo, which is the Google Play, those are $200,000 cars.
I got to get this in. Yesterday we had great coverage. Thank you to our team for linking it up with the president-elect at the New York Stock Exchange. The billionaire of the United States was not there. I answer the critics of Elon Musk and Ives. Is he getting taxpayer support for all of his ventures? Is he getting a free ride off the back of the American taxpayer?
I disagree. I would argue you're talking about he made a bet for the ages with Trump and essentially iced out, if you look at last administrations when it comes to Biden administration, especially around EVs, and now you're going to really see him doubling down. And within the Beltway, there's going to be major changes, and when that knock at the door happens, it's Musk.
Gene Munster, give me an EV update. We won't let the Chinese in. Europe's, I read about BMW and Mercedes. It's a train wreck, basically, no pun intended. Gene Munster, what is the optimal EV strategy for our listeners across America?
Well, if you're thinking about buying an EV, buy it in the next 2 weeks in the U.S. because what could happen with those tax credits. As far as like what's happening with the broader market, just looking at Tesla, for example, units are basically going to be flattish for calendar 24. Musk talked about 20 to 30% growth for next year. So a huge rebound that surprised analysts, investors. The street right now is looking for 14%. So kind of saying that Elon's being too optimistic on that. But I think the big picture, Tom, is that we're coming through the EV winter here into starting to be a spring. And ultimately, I think that EVs just are naturally a better way to move around. It's not a political statement. It's basically a physics statement. And I think that the free hand of the market will prove out that it's a more efficient way to move, which will ultimately have EVs. I consider it an undeniable truth that eventually all vehicles will be electric.
Gene, I'm cruising around the Jersey Shore with my Vespa scooter. I'm getting like 80 miles to the gallon. I don't need you and Dan Ives. But Dan, tell me about where you think ultimate demand is for electric vehicles, because I feel like we're in a bump in the road kind of moment here.
It's a bump in the road, but our view is that if you get to 20% EV penetration, call it over the next 4 or 5 years, that changes the game for Tesla. It changes the game really for the industry. But you look what's happening in Detroit with the big three. They're definitely starting to hedge that strategy in terms of, especially when it comes to hybrid. And I think this continues to be a bump in the road. It's not the end. It's a transitional state in terms of our view of the industry.
Thank you guys for lining this up. This has been great. Gene Munster, I didn't know you guys were in speaking terms. It's great. Gene
Munster's the GOAT.
Yeah.
He is.
Right on, saluting you here.
Greatly appreciate Gene Munster from Minneapolis. Well, Dan Ives, thanks for coming in. I'm looking at Aviator Nation, and they don't make my size.
Oh, they can make a and a special bow tie for you. I mean,
Aviator Nation bow tie.
Oh, I mean, look, that could change. Next thing you know, those sales would just go off the rack if Keene started wearing Aviator Nation bow tie.
What do you think, Paul? I mean, it's a fashion reach,
totally.
to say the least.
But Tom, you're what we call back in the day. You're a big fella. You're not. I don't know if they got that for you. I mean, Tom's like a hockey player from Rochester.
It's like
they make him big up there.
Dan Ives, what are you doing for the holidays?
I mean,
going to Singapore?
Look, the holidays is all about college football playoffs. It's about
Penn State
team. Again, we got punched in the mouth versus Oregon, came back, gut check. Now SMU next week. Win that, go on to to Phoenix, and then we'll see what happens there.
Dan Ives, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. We're doing Joe Cocker today. I saw Joe Cocker. Good morning, 92.9 FM from Mount Katahdin to Block Island. The Mill Hill Club, West Yarmouth.
Okay.
I had a fine beverage in a plastic cup at the Mill Hill Club.
Always.
DJ Sullivan. They tore it down 10 years ago. DJ Sullivan was there. Good morning, DJ Sullivan, John Morgan, and the rest of the Cape Cod scene. Joe.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. First off, thank you for the many comments of the appearance of Gene Munster and Dan Ives together. They're just a huge response. Thank you out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. It's real easy. Look for Lisa Mateo's Gorgiosity there. Click on it. You got a live chat you can deal with as well. I've been so busy this morning, I've barely gotten to the live chat. Futures up 20. NASDAQ futures, Ives and Munster moving them higher. Up 0.8
Two players,
of a
serious
percent.
Players there.
VIX comes in. I don't know. Do we get a 12 VIX? We'll have to see here on a Friday. I'm watching the 10-year real yield make it 2.00%. That's an effervescence. Maybe we heard that from the president-elect yesterday at the New York Stock Exchange as well. I got to get Paul. I'm just frazzled here after talking. I didn't know Munster and Ives are on speaking terms. That really worked out.
I guess, yeah absolutely.
Great.
Why not?
Real
Two
love
smart
fest.
folks. We appreciate their
Bloomberg
time.
Surveillance. We're brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. They design the future, making career paths in digital, in industrial, and interior design tech-focused and tech-powered. Learn more at njit.edu/design, njit.edu/design. They have been with us for years. New Jersey Institute of Technology.
Yes, great folks.
Thank you so much. Right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
And we've got tech stocks leading the gains in futures with shares of Broadcom. That's a chip maker for Apple, other big tech companies, up 17%. And this is after its earnings topped estimates. That was thanks to a boom in its AI chips. So now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.7%, 159 points. Dow futures, little changed, up about 16. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 18 points. The 2-year yield, 4.19%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%. And that's up 1 basis point. Europe stock 600. Well, that's down about 0.1% after France's President Emmanuel Macron names a new prime minister. We'll check in with currencies. The euro, that's up about 0.3%. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker. The euro, like we said, is stronger, but the British pound is weaker. Bitcoin up about 0.5% at just over 100,000. To earnings we go. We'll start with shares of furniture company RH. You know them as Restoration Hardware, up 13%, swung to a quarterly profit. And then Costco posted a quarterly profit, beat expectations. The stock is up 50% year to date through Thursday's close. Shares have really been back and forth all morning. Right now, they are down about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. On a Friday, and an eventful Friday as well. So much of it, particularly here in Manhattan. Good morning, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Centered around the president-elect's appearance yesterday at the New York Stock Exchange.
It was
I thought he should have let the First Lady ring the bell.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, what is that about?
Exactly. But I mean, it's you think about Donald Trump. I mean, he made his name here in New York City with the New York City real estate and that part of his career here. So ringing in the New York Stock, it's the first time. I thought he would have done it prior to.
Oh no, I think he did, but
he did?
The First Lady rang the bell the last time.
Okay, very good. Okay, so then being the Time Magazine Person of the
Year,
Year,
that was the time.
It was a big day for him.
It was like it was a choreographed event. You get the feeling.
Yep, very, very much so.
You know, I think it was. And some of the worthies, the Vice President-elect with them as well. So it was good to see that. I spoke to David Gura yesterday.
The David Gura.
It was very difficult. My people tried to get him for like 3 days.
I know. Well,
he was in Washington with the Secretary of Treasury.
Yep.
And she was sorry about the budget deficit.
Right.
That's a hell of a sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lisa, are we concerned about the budget deficit? I think so.
Of course.
It's ginormous.
It's ginormous.
I'm going to pause here. She's very busy. I mean, that Margaret even talks to us. It's just like this huge deal. Margaret Brennan, those that can do, those that can't talk too much. Margaret Brennan owned the high ground across the Mediterranean a number of years ago, starting in Tunisia and going to the history in Cairo. And now, of course, we're focused on Syria. She came over then to CBS Face the Nation. Yeah, it's like, okay, CBS Face the Nation. It has reinvented the show, leading to #1 ratings starting 18 months, 2 years ago. And that continues to advance on the election. Face the Nation, see it on CBS and hear it on Bloomberg Radio Sunday afternoon. Margaret Brennan, there's all this talk about the tawdry talk about the cabinet. We got a Green Beret coming into Congress. Mike Waltz, he's going to come into the administration. How is Mike Waltz going to advise President-elect Trump on the ripping apart of Syria?
That's exactly one of the questions I want to put to him on Sunday when he joins us on Face the Nation in his first network interview since being selected as the National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. He is already in contact with the current National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, getting briefings on what's going on. We know that the Trump team has very quickly turned its focus to the country next door, Iran, which pulled back its support from Bashar al-Assad, one of the reasons why his government just collapsed after 54 years of rule of the Assad regime. So we're going to ask what the plans are, whether Iran in this weakened state is worth exploiting or whether it is at risk of turning nuclear because they are cornered and in a vulnerable spot. U.S. intelligence declassified a report just last week warning exactly of that. If pushed too far while cornered, that could trigger them to actually start up their nuclear program.
Maybe Face the Nation will interview Margaret Brennan. Margaret Brennan, as you sit there with all the reporting of CBS, is Erdogan driving the boat now in the Levant and down to Egypt? I mean, I don't know where El-Sisi fits in. I don't know where UAE or Riyadh fits in. With all your study on this, Margaret Brennan, who's leading in the new Syria? Is it Erdogan?
That's a great question. It certainly seems to be where the U.S. is looking for help. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Turkey just yesterday. It is Turkish intelligence that is the U.S. serving as the U.S. conduit to Mohammed al-Jilani, this head of HTS, the rebel group and the rebel leader who seem to be at the forefront of this successful overthrow of the Assad regime. The question is Jilani himself actually still perceived as a threat to the United States because of his past links to al-Qaeda? Technically, he's designated as a terrorist, but he's signaling this new path. So the U.S. is really trying to suss out whether what he's saying publicly, all the right things about protecting minorities, about, trying to really keep law and order in place in the existing institutions, is he real? Does he mean it? And Turkey is helping the United States to suss that out right now.
Margaret, what's the feeling within the Beltway these days about maybe the first 100 days of this incoming Trump administration? How do you think this is going to play out?
Oh, gosh. Get your rest and get your caffeine because it's going to be pretty intense. We already know, every president vows, on day one, I'm going to sign this or that, and it'll change the world for you. As you know, it's not that easy. You can sign a piece of paper with an executive order that does start to put policy positions in place, but if you want to affect real change, you got to get Congress to give you the money to do it and actually change the law. So some of the immigration policies the Trump administration has said they can try to execute on day one. Some of the things that Donald Trump has vowed to do, like pardoning the January 6th attackers on the U.S. Capitol, those who are nonviolent, that's going to cause some real concern within law enforcement. We'll talk about that Sunday with Amy Klobuchar, who sits on the Judiciary Committee.
Very quickly here, Margaret. Wasserman, I thought at the Cook Political Report, was particularly strong this week about picking up the pieces for the Democratic Party. There's Klobuchar, who's got her head screwed on. I'm going to be direct about it. Is she leaning away from the progressives? Is she dragging the progressives with her? What are you going to get out of her on Sunday?
Well, Amy Klobuchar, the senator, and you remember this from when she ran for president, she tries to be more of that centrist, the very Midwest sort of practical thinker. She was critical of Joe Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden. Said she wasn't a fan of that. So she is willing to criticize leadership. We want to talk to her about this decision to have these sweeping pardons and clemency decisions of 1,500, most in a single day, that Joe Biden issued yesterday. We want to talk to her, though, what's ahead for justice, because Donald Trump, as we just said, plans to issue these pardons to January 6 attackers and also put a new loyalist at the head of the FBI.
Margaret Brennan, congratulations on the success of Face the Nation on the CBS television network Sunday morning. Hear it on Bloomberg Radio, 2 p.m. in New York, in her Washington, D.C., and 92.9 FM in Boston. Face the Nation is Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. Right to it. Our news in New York City is Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Well, let's start right now with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Today, he is in Turkey making remarks on supporting the Syrian people after the Assad regime fell.
We're very focused on Syria, very focused on the opportunity that now is before us and before the Syrian people to move from out from under the shackles of Bashar al-Assad to a different and better future for the Syrian people.
Today is the first Friday prayers since Bashar al-Assad and his family fled to Russia nearly 1 week ago. The latest that's taking place with the United Healthcare CEO murder, Manhattan prosecutors are now presenting evidence to secure an indictment against Luigi Mangione in the killing of Brian Thompson. ABC reports at least 3 search warrants have been issued for the alleged shooter's phone, backpack, and the Manhattan hostel where he stayed. And it's said that prosecutors have started presenting evidence to a grand jury seeking an indictment that could strengthen their case for Mangione's extradition from Pennsylvania. A judge set a hearing for December 30th. President Emmanuel Macron picked Francois Bayrou to be France's new prime minister, calling on a long-standing centrist ally to navigate a fractured political landscape that toppled the previous administration. Bayrou, who leads the centrist Democratic Movement Party known as Modem, steps into the breach after far-right leader Marine Le Pen allied with a left-wing coalition of lawmakers last week to oust Michel Barnier from the office as he attempted to drive a stringent budget through Parliament. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg First Word, they coalesce the sell side. Over in here, TD Cowen, Oliver Chen. Costco's newness, quality, and value is having a strong resonance with Lisa Mateo.
Wow.
William Blair's Philip Blee says the strong results come as no surprise because she's there. Lisa Mateo's there every weekend. Zihan Ma at Bernstein, the Black Book at Bernstein. Zihan Ma, she is encouraged by Costco's consistent ability to take the paycheck of Lisa Mateo. There it is. What's new? What's fresh at Costco, Lisa?
I have to go this weekend, actually. You see, this is what I do in between. I'm writing my Costco list. You don't know that. That's what I'm really doing.
I thought you were writing news copy. No, you're right.
I'm writing my Costco list.
Okay, very good.
I don't have his name in front of me. On YouTube, there's like YouTube guy, and he goes into stores.
Yes.
And he's raving about Costco. I mean, he's just, it's like...
Well, it's the holiday time, too, and that's where I get my gifts. Shh, quiet, don't tell anyone. But that's where I get a lot of holiday gifts, too.
So is it 2-cart or 3-cart weekend?
During holidays, it's like almost 2 carts. I'm shoving stuff on the bottom.
It's embarrassing.
It's
Has anyone ever been injured?
Not as of yet, but this weekend could be a doozy.
We'll see. There's your report. Bloomberg First Word. Thank you, Sanford Bernstein, Morgan Stanley, TD Cowen, and William Blair for placing Lisa Mateo in your coverage. Futures up 16. The VIX 13.46. Lions Bills this weekend.
Nice.
Bloomberg Surveillance.
We'll watch.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. Well, we've got futures kind of pointing to a strong end of the week on Wall Street. Traders ahead of the Federal Reserve interest rate decision of the year. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 145 points. We're starting to see a little change in the Dow. It's down about a point right now. S&P futures up 0.2% or 14 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.20%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.35%, and that's up 2 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. Few companies making news. Cantor, it's agreed to pay $6.75 million to settle SEC allegations that it misled investors in 2 blank check firms. That was before their stock market debuts. And Elon Musk, he renewed his feud with the SEC. He's revealing that the agency is investigating Neuralink, could even take action over his investments in Twitter. And in other news, Reuters reporting the Trump and transition team will want the incoming administration to drop a car crash reporting requirement that was opposed by Elon Musk's Tesla. Should have talked about that with our Dan Ives. And shares of EV charging company EVgo, they're up 6%. The reason why? Well, it closed a $1.25 billion loan facility from the Energy Department. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Omar Aguilar with us right now with nice. Charles Schwab, and it's important, but I want to do an audible here. Come on, folks. It's a Friday in December. We can audible with Omar as we can. Omar, you came out of Mexican universities, and there you ended up at Duke University's Institute of Statistics and Decision Sciences. That's like a real major, Paul, at Duke.
Yeah,
That's
they did not hang out with us.
They had slide rule. Omar had a slide rule.
Exactly.
He was one of the first people to get an HP 286 back then.
I stayed away from the business.
Tell me, Omar, about the Fulbright Scholar experience with Duke.
It was fantastic. And, good morning. And by the way, I was coding in Fortran 77 and Pascal as I was entering graduate school at Duke University. And it was a great experience. The Fulbright program is one of the best programs ever in the history of academics, and has given a lot of us the opportunity to come and get, graduate education, which is amazing. And the combination of, the great academic, system in the United States with Fulbright, it is just something that just enhances the ability for everybody to just do better.
And what's important here, of course, is the foundation of statistics. And Paul, I look at the central limit theorem, which is when you cut off the Jenny Cream-ales at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Omar, Wei Lee over at BlackRock is adamant that we are transformative. We are not going to doom and gloom, revert to the mean, to the center tendency, and there's going to be a new sustained prosperity, earnings, and cash flow. Do you buy the idea from Wei Lee that we won't gloom and doom, revert to the mean?
Well, the length of the cycles and the length of the distribution of outcomes is usually what determines whether or not there is consistency in mean reversion. So as you look at just pure statistical factors, you can have a long cycle over 50 years or a short cycle of just a few weeks, and that mean changes over time. Our belief is that we have gone into different parts of the cycle over time. And what we are seeing now is that, we have gone through like the last part of the business cycle, which is the post-pandemic, is basically now towards the end. We probably can say now that the whole discussion about what happened post-COVID is pretty much behind us. And I think we're just looking at the new set of potential changes in, the level of interest rates, the level of earnings growth, the level of economic growth, and the level of inflation. And I think it's almost like a reset button that we observe, just at the end of this fall, which is kind of an interesting setup. So I don't necessarily dispute that the mean changes over time. I think it's fair to say that the mean is never constant, but I do think that there is mean reversion that still exists, and that consistency usually changes depending on what part of the economic cycle you are.
Omar, it's now 5 weeks since the U.S. election here. Did you guys at Schwab change your investment outlook, your investment themes to reflect a new administration and the Republicans controlling both houses of Congress?
Yes, and yes on the first question. I don't think the uncertainty about the constituents related to how decisions will be made and the timing for those decisions to get made changed our outlook. But definitely the outcome of the election made a significant change in the way that we were positioning strategies and talking to clients. And the biggest, pieces there, had to do with fixed income. It had to do with inflation outlook. We still believe that there is a sustainable growth. We're still fairly optimistic about what, and our clients are fairly optimistic what the markets and the economy would do next year. But at the same time, we still have uncertainty around what the inflation outlook will be, which also means that it potentially change the way that you adjust the duration of your fixed income portfolios.
Credit risk. How much credit risk are you taking there? A lot of folks are telling us you're really not getting paid in terms of spread over treasuries for credit risk. Yet, high yield and leverage loans have been the best performing players in the fixed income business.
Yeah, we still believe that there is opportunities to invest in high quality investment grade credit. Yes, you're right. The spreads are not as big and they're fairly tight. But we also don't think that it's necessary to go all the way through high yield. It's certainly an area that is risky. High yield in many cases has very similar risk characteristics than investing in equities. So, in certain way, you can actually get certain level of income, but you can still have income and capital appreciation when you combine it with equities.
Omar, we just had Gene Munster and Dan Ives on. Thanks again, folks, for the huge response to our discussion on Mag 7. I'm going to be honest, Omar, they're crazy optimistic out 12 months, 18 months on Mag 7. I'm not asking you to do a sell-side Mag 7 analysis, but do you find the financial ratios of Mag 7 to be okay, to be center tendency, or are they outrageously priced?
The levels of multiples and the expectations and the multiple expansion of that part of the market, and that is, seems to be, at least one or no, if not 1.5 standard deviations relative to what is sustainable. And I will just probably say that because the pace of earnings growth and free cash flow generation has been outstanding. But sustaining that at the level of the market capital they have, it is very hard to justify. So, while we still believe that the stability that those, high growth mega cap companies, it is still pretty good and attractive to do. I think the pace of, what they can generate relative to the other opportunities where things have been undervalued is probably not justified. So what we have encouraged, our clients to look at is to, start moving into cyclicals. If you look at the top quintile of momentum, which usually tells you what has worked well in the last 6 to 12 months, is now, concentrated in financials and less on technology, which also tells you how the market is rewarding now areas that were not necessarily as, overpriced than what we had on those Mag 7s.
Omar, thank you so much. Omar Aguilar with Schwab Asset Management. Thank you for those comments on Duke and their commitment to the Fulbright Scholar Program, I should say. I did Route 66 today in the promotion. I'm doing highways.
Okay.
Lou Mitchell's in Chicago. It was 9 degrees yesterday in Chicago. Oof. Heat wave. Today it's 18.
There you go.
Lou Mitchell's. This just sounds so Lisa. I can't stand it. Their Greek sausage special, fresh tomato, green pepper, onion, and Greek sausage. That omelet's coming in at $16.95.
Sounds pretty hearty, though. I mean, I don't know.
That omelet in Manhattan is $40.
Yeah, I'll take that.
$16.95.
Chicago, love it.
They serve Senka. Lou Mitchell's, good morning, in Chicago. They got, egg sandwich, $11.75.
I'm getting hungry.
Corned beef hash.
Love corned beef hash.
All the stuff, Lisa. All this. Nothing is gluten free.
No.
That's what I see.
Are there egg whites?
I wouldn't know what gluten.
No, it's un-American. Come on, egg whites. Good morning in Chicago, the beginning of Route 66 out west. Futures, they were up 20. We come back a little bit, up 13. VIX 13.5 on what am I watching? The 10-year real yield, it is a 2.00% higher yield structure the last few days. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this opening bell report is brought to you by JP Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest growing investment vehicle with the new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETF insights to learn more. All right, so far this morning, the Wall Street tech rally really helped push the tech-heavy NASDAQ higher, NASDAQ futures. A big part of that was Broadcom. We'll get to their shares in just a bit. Right now, we've got things started, so let's see how the last trading day of the week kicks off. The S&P 500 will start there up 0.2%, 16 points, 6,068. The Dow up 0.1%, or 65 points at 43,971. And the NASDAQ up 0.4%, 90 points at 19,997. The two-year yield, 4.20%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%, and that's up 2 basis points. We head over to Brent crude. It's up about 0.5%, $73 a barrel. WTI crude, $70 a barrel. And we have spot gold lower, $2,661 an ounce. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change, and Bitcoin up about 0.5% at just over 100,000 at the open. I want to check in with Broadcom. Their shares up 17%. Other chip stocks tied to the AI boom. We have Marvell up 6%. And Nvidia up about 1%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. Again, on digital, you'll see it out, particularly at Bloomberg Podcasts. Gene Munster, Dan Ives, really some huge response to that, and thank you for that. NASDAQ on the opening here, 1 minute in, up 0.8%. There are exactly and only two types of long-only buy-side. People that wander into portfolio management, and that's all they've ever done. And then there are people who started out in sales, covering an alphabet soup like ABS, MBS, CMBS. And then they're in sales and they're like, OMG, she's out of Yale. She's really smart. Let's get her over into some form of analysis of individual securities. And then after that, you actually trade where you enjoy losing money a few times. There's no substitute for that.
Nope.
I've enjoyed that.
Yep.
And then finally, she lands at the Trust Company of the West as a specialist portfolio manager. That's major cred, Paul.
That's major cred, Tom. Liza Crawford, specialist portfolio manager in the fixed income group at TCW. Now, when I went to TCW, Tom, I went to the equity floor. I avoided the fixed income floor like the plague because that's a lot of math, particularly around these.
Like Greek letters.
Greek letters, exactly. Liza, thanks so much for joining us here. I'm looking at the 30-year Treasury, 6.69%. What is going on there? What do you do in the mortgage-backed securities business, Liza? Do you guys see value there these days?
Yeah, so we're active across the broader securitized product space, and that includes mortgage-backed securities, both agency and private label. On the agency mortgage-backed securities side, our generalists are really leading the positioning to take advantage of both a dislocated market as well as the opportunity to rotate that agency mortgage-backed securities exposure into corporate credit when corporate credit looks more attractive. If we think about the broader securitized credit market, there you're looking at shorter floating rate, you're looking at opportunities for consumer, commercial, et cetera, all that alphabet soup. So there are opportunities to take advantage of irrespective of rates.
Gene Munster just sends in an email. Tom, Broadcom jumps 19%, over $1 trillion. Do you think I should enter my first trade?
Exactly,
my first
Tom.
odd lot?
Yep.
Liza, what's really important to me here, and I mentioned this yesterday, I have a crystal clear memory of Gillian Tett in the FT writing about CDO squareds a million years ago, where all my radar went up over derivative fluff. In your world at TCW, are we heading into derivative excesses again?
Thinking about derivatives, there are a couple ways where we're seeing that most active now and actually taking advantage of some opportunities. So first, there's synthetic risk transfer. Credit-linked notes can be another expression of that. Yeah, so that's banks looking for capital relief, and then they're broadening their investor base that can access that it's a levered expression of that underlying collateral. It's been very active in Europe for years, and then now it's more prominent in the US since rate hikes. So that's an area we'll see significant growth in, and we actively take advantage of that. To give you a look through to some of the underlying collateral, it's seasoned prime auto loans. So very much in the mix with that broader securitized credit. product base. Yeah.
So, I mean, Liza, I always tell when we have TCW folks on our show, I kind of just tell our listeners and our viewers, these are some of the smarter folks that we deal with out there. Can you explain to me what agency mortgage-backed securities are and why you guys are significantly overweight agency mortgage-backed securities?
Sure. So agency mortgage-backed securities are collateral that's guaranteed by the government-sponsored enterprises. They're dedicated to creating access to housing, home affordability. In the U.S., the most common product is a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. So these are naturally long-duration products. It's also an $8.7 trillion market, so it's incredibly liquid. There are different ways to take advantage of the market and put positions on. If you're looking at kind of TBA, that's an area where you can actively trade the coupon stack. If you're looking at spec pools, you can have an expression about specific collateral stories. It's all about speeds. It's all about figuring out what's going to pay fast, what's going to pay slow, and are you getting paid for that optionality or for that risk. And then when we think about today's market in agency mortgage-backed securities, spreads are still elevated because the market has been relatively dislocated since there was an uneconomic Fed buyer during larger QE that stepped back, and then some banks weren't managing their duration correctly, and banks tend to take a step back when there's rate volatility. And then also we've seen them more active in the agency MBS market in Ginnie floaters, so sticking with kind of a floating rate product. And then money managers are all rather long, so there isn't necessarily this marginal buyer in this current market environment.
Is there enough jargon there for everybody on their morning commutes?
Ginnie floaters. America? I'm all in on
Ginnie floaters.
I'm calling my guy at UBS. Give me some Ginnie floaters.
A Ginnie cream ale floater was with a scoop of vanilla ice cream in it. Yeah. Okay, back in the old days, Liza, like Ginnie Mae's, and you bought it and you had to worry about people paying it off and it retired early. Is it different now, or is it the same old business as it was 30 years ago?
You still have to think about, defaults and an early refinancing, and both of those come through as a prepayment. So there's always going to be that negative convexity in broader agency MBS. When you're looking at the floating rate product, you're being thoughtful as well about, SOFR, et cetera. There are a lot of ways to structure your agency MBS exposure. I'll note, why banks with Ginnie floaters. Ginnie has an explicit guarantee, so there's even more favorable capital treatment. And then the floaters help them avoid, having to keep rehedging moves in the rate market.
Do you talk like this at home? I mean, are you talking convexity in the kitchen at home?
So my husband's a portfolio manager at Apollo. So yeah, we do sometimes. He doesn't let me talk about work much.
Is there a Chinese wall in the kitchen that he's with Apollo and you're with TCW?
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
Mm-hmm. We met at Credit Suisse. It's even better.
Oh, Paul, let's rip up the script right now. I mean, Paul, that sounds like something there.
Back in my days at Credit Suisse,
down to the restaurant down at the bottom of the tower.
11 Madison.
11 Madison.
We would go there when we were at Credit Suisse First Boston. We'd go there all the time before it was really before it was the 11 Madison. It was just kind of they were serving up lowly investment bankers. So, Liza, talk to us about the real estate part of your business. You talked about the mortgage security business. Don't we have a problem with commercial real estate? Are you seeing that in your market at all with some of these loans presumably way underwater?
So we're really disciplined on underwriting to the fundamentals. So we're actively trying to avoid defaults. Something goes wrong if we're buying and something defaults. And so what we've taken advantage of is that credit bifurcation and leaning into really wide spreads for asset that we have high conviction. They will refinance on time. They won't get modified and extended, or they won't face a write down. And really that trade has played off this year, or is really paid off this year. We've seen credit spreads rally across a lot of product, but with commercial mortgage-backed securities, we've seen tremendous kind of repricing in the second half of this year. I know when I was just talking to y'all about a month ago, we were talking about subs on that Rockefeller Center, moving well into the 400s, and now they're in the 360s, just to give you a signal. So there's a recovery in higher quality CMBS spreads. We're going to see more transactions for broader commercial real estate because the cost of financing has come down, but we're still going to see some dislocation in some of these very stressed assets and these very stressed capital structures and ongoing resolutions.
I'm looking at the Apollo Management DDIS. I wonder if it's just, This is very cool. Liza, thank you so much. Liza Crawford with us this morning. It's really interesting, folks, and it's a little window there, without intruding into, the life of Wall Street.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way a lot of houses are. And, of course, there's all sorts of rules about what they can and cannot talk about.
I tell you, back in the day, Credit Suisse versus Boston time, we felt like we could compete with anybody, anywhere, anytime, in any business. Unfortunately, the firm had this... They didn't understand this whole risk management thing.
Good morning to Dr. Sauce. Neil Sauce was one of the first people to support me in this act, and he was a lot to do with that research intensity. We should also say good morning to Dominic Constant and Ira Jersey, because they held down the research component there as well. I don't think Ira could drink. He wasn't down in the bar at 11 minutes.
No, he's doing great. Convexities. I don't know what he's doing.
I have no idea what Lisa said there, folks. We try to avoid the jargon. Sometimes with CMBS people, it's like talking to Michael Barr.
Ginny floaters. That's a new one for me. I'm using that at the bar tonight. Swan Tavern. I'm going to float some Ginny floater discussion.
Green on the screen. The NASDAQ 100 up 0.9%. VIX lower a significant 13.37. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, we'll have more on the suspect in the murder of a healthcare CEO. But first, French President Emmanuel Macron today named centrist ally Francois Bayrou as prime minister after a historic parliamentary vote ousted the previous government last week. Bayrou's political experience is seen as key in efforts to restore stability, as no single party holds a majority at the National Assembly. We're learning more about the suspect accused of killing United Health Group executive Brian Thompson. Bloomberg's John Tucker reports.
As it turns out, Luigi Mangione wasn't a member of United Health's insurance plans. It seems to dispel the idea the shooting he's accused of was motivated by a grievance from his personal experience with the nation's largest health insurer. Mangione was arrested in Pennsylvania Monday with a manifesto referencing the company's size, inaccurately describing United Health as the fourth largest company by market value. Mangione remains in Pennsylvania fighting extradition to New York, but Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg says he's confident the 26-year-old will be extradited.
We intend to learn more, and we have a lot of things to do, and as things go forward, there may be additional charges to bring.
Since the shooting, people speculated about whether the gunman was a customer upset over a denied medical claim. Now it appears that his grievances were more broad-based. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
It's been over 12 years since Houston native Austin Tice was kidnapped while reporting on Syria's civil war. His parents are hoping that the regime change in Syria helps bring about his release and freedom. Austin's parents, Deborah and Mark Tice.
We are being updated by people on the ground.
Yeah, and we're fortunate to have in our corner and supporting us hugely a number of different people, different organizations.
The U.S. is working to bring home another American citizen found Thursday in Syria, Travis Timmerman. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Apple up a stick, 249-ish. We had a print of 250 the other day. I got a market cap of 3.77 trillion. So it's, I did the math. Dan Ives taught me how to interpolate the extrapolate.
Interpolate? Nice word.
Nailed it. And it's like 263.
Okay.
We got to go 249 to 263
Cup of
to
coffee,
get to
as you
4
would say.
trillion.
Sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah, but Dan's been calling for that 4 trillion number for a while.
Gene backed him up.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Said, it's just mad. It's like Yardeni. People are like Yardeni's nuts with his calls. And basically, it's a 7% expansion.
Yep.
And the headline is these guys go out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
Yep. And I think the what we're hearing about the market call is it's going to be earnings driven in 2025. You need to see the earnings growth come through to drive this market higher.
And maybe the revenue. Look at that.
Yep.
Apple has 150,000 people. I can read the DES screen like no one.
Oh, it's perfect.
Foundational
Makes it sound
at
smart.
Bloomberg. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Matei. We've got stocks pointing to a strong end to the week on Wall Street. A big part of that, surge in Broadcom. Its shares are up about 21%. And this is after predicting a boom in demand for its AI chips, also reaching a $1 trillion market value. Now that's pushing shares of its peers up higher. Companies like Marvell Technology, that's up about 10%. Micron Technology up 4%. And we have Nvidia up nearly 1%. Let's get to the market. So we have the NASDAQ up 0.7%, 147 points at 20,048. We have the Dow up 0.1%, 70 points at 43,982, and the S&P 500 up 0.4%, 26 points at 6,077. The 2-year yield 4.22%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.36%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. And finally, shares of furniture retailer RH, checking with them, they are up about 15%, raised its revenue forecast for 2025, swung to a profit in the third quarter. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. We say this for the backside of the show, and it affects all of us. Coffee is a moonshot. The summary is Brazil and Vietnam challenges, but it's always more nuanced than that. She's truly expert at this out of Reading. And LSE, Kona Haque is absolutely iconic on what are called the softs, away from oil. Maybe a little bit of metal is thrown in there, but it's mostly about the agricultural research she did at Reading University and bringing that over worldwide at ED&F Man. Kona, thank you so much for joining. I got ED&F Man doing the touchy-feely coffee of Volcaf, making coffee business better together. We're going to be green. We're going to go out and help the farmers. Is that all pushed aside by the crisis of coffee? Is the pricing so egregious that the normal business of coffee is shifted?
Oh, I think we're in an extreme part of the cycle. At the end of the day, all commodities are very cyclical. Agricultural markets, obviously, because of the weather cycles. But within the agricultural space, I would argue that the soft commodities, which are basically just grown in the tropical countries, have more heightened and more extreme cycles. And arguably, as we move towards more climate change impacted scenarios, those cycles are going to be more extreme. So what we're seeing in situation is, as you mentioned, unprecedented droughts in Brazil, severe droughts in Vietnam. These two countries are the biggest producers and exporters of coffee. Number one Arabica exporter, number two Robusta exporter. So they are massive. And when you have two producers seeing droughts leading to drops in yields, inevitably you see a supply contraction, the supply demand fundamentals go out of whack, prices spike up, stocks start falling, and you get the situation we're in today. So yes, it's extreme, but not and we've reached record highs in terms of the Arabica price, but it's not unprecedented. These are the cycles we have to live with.
I don't know. I don't like living with this. I got coffee on my screen here, up 71%. Year to date. My double short mocha at Starbucks, Route 35 in Wall Township, New Jersey, $5.83. It was like $3.50 a year ago. I don't know what's going on. So, Kona, is there any solution if I'm a coffee farmer? Is there any solution there technologically that can even out some of these swings here in the climate?
No, it's not that easy. And maybe what today's high prices are doing is exactly telling you that we're going to have to invest in more science to adapt to extreme weather event scenarios, and so the yields can still continue to be future-proof. Maybe that's what the prices are telling us. But in the short term, it's tricky because they're tree crops. They're not row crops like corn or wheat, which grow every year. As soon as the price goes up, farmers go and plant a lot of them. In the case of coffee, it takes 3 to 4 years to grow from a tree from seedling level to become full fruiting.
Okay.
And so, and then as long as weather is good, it'll take some time to improve. And on the demand side, demand is pretty sticky. It's inelastic. People find coffee a small luxury that they don't need to sacrifice. They don't need to forego. What we have started to see is consumption from outdoors, like, in the outdoor coffee shops, are slowly transferring into at-home consumption because it's cheaper at home. And within the at-home consumption, we're seeing downgrades to lower quality, maybe own brands, private labels.
Kona,
so people are doing what we can.
Yeah, Kona, USDA was out with a summary on Vietnam, and they say just in the last 3 days that they're seeing more planting. Farmers are motivated because of high coffee prices to plant more trees. Is the coffee equivalent, what I use in my speeches, for monopsony, which is a rubber plantation in Singapore? Is in Brazil and in Vietnam coffee where all the powers in the hands of the big companies, the shippers, the regional business people, and not in the power of the farmer?
Farmers will sell to the traders, the middlemen. The traders then sell to the roasters. And some of them are small roasters, some of them are the big roasters. The big roasters are the likes of Nestle, Starbucks, JDE, Pete. So, no, I would, depending where you are, yes, maybe in the USA, a lot of the final coffee that we consume is in the hands of some big multi organizations and international corporations. But in different countries, you have small roasters as well, so different medium sizes as well. And now increasingly, where you're seeing more and more independent roasters popping up, there's a real trend for that.
Kona, what's the outlook for coffee here? I mean, I guess it's an agricultural question, but what are the growers telling you about the next, year, 2 years, and what their expectations are?
So prices are definitely high. So the incentives, as you mentioned, are very strong. If weather complies, then they will look after their crop next year. But when we did our crop tours, because at ED&F Man we do our crop tours, and what we saw was that the lack of rains in Brazil during our summer had a very bad impact on the blossom set. So the blossoms look good, but those blossoms and flowers didn't convert into actual buds and cherries. Wow. So that's why we didn't see a crop. And that's that's the problem we're facing. And a lot of farmers thought this is not great. We're going to have to completely stump our trees. So we'll see recovery for sure in 2026, but not in the short term.
Kona, one final question. Lisa emails in and says, ask Kona if a peppermint mocha frappuccino blended beverage at Starbucks, is it going to top tick $10 here? Kona, are we heading for a $10 Starbucks?
But how much does it cost today?
$8, so says Lisa, daily, with profanity wrapped around it. Because when you asked what are your solutions to this supply demand tightness, one of the solutions is that consumption has to fall, and for consumption to fall, these roasters are going to have to pass on the higher cost to the retailers, and ultimately, yes, if higher costs leads to people thinking $10 is too much, let's give it up, then that's what we need to happen. Kona Haque, thank you so much. Honored. With ED&F Man, I can't say enough about their Volt Cafe research project in support of farmers amid this crisis as well.
So she does crop tours.
Oh,
she
she's
goes
huge.
to Vietnam,
she's saying the
Brazil
flowers and the buds and
wow.
Darjeeling tea and Kathmandu or Nepal or whatever. So we go to Lisa Mateo, surveillance coffee correspondent here. What are you going to do at $9.98 for the next Starbucks?
You know what the thing is? They keep rising the prices, but I'm going to wind up paying it anyway.
Yep.
Like she said, it's the one luxury we have.
Yeah. It's the one thing. So that's where I'm
it's
stuck.
free upstairs.
Well, not here.
Says the voice of God.
On the weekend.
The voice of reason, John Tucker.
Or yes, lunchtime during
John,
school time.
have you seen any drones over your house in New Jersey?
I'm of the mind these are aliens and they're searching for intelligence.
Thank you. That's
So
what
New Jersey is obviously the first place they go. They try
Thank
Pennsylvania.
You. Team news coverage here. Thank you so much. Thank you on the comments on Cocker as well. Leonard Cohen.
In the heavens, I'm guided by the birthmark on my skin.